This page of the mag looks like it's from back in 99 November, it says at the bottom there. They were pushing the boat out as usual, claiming to be the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag. Big headline is for Jet Force Gemini proclaiming world's first review and saying it's Rare's stunner. Always keen to see what Rare were up to on the N64 back then. They did know their stuff, even if they did get a bit overhyped sometimes. Your first look at O section is flagging up Zelda Gaiden, which we all know is Majora's Mask now. Find out how it plays, it says, so a first impression piece maybe. Then there's Kirby 64, Mother 3, and Super Mario Adventure. Bit vague that last one. Could be anything Mario related really. They've got latest news and picks on Mario Party 2, Winback, Custom Robo and Knockout Kings 2. Seems like they're covering a decent range of games coming out at the time. Looks like there's a Planet Game Boy section for the handheld stuff as well. And a free Perfect Dark and Pokemon Flip poster. Well, everyone loved a free poster, especially with those two big hitters on it. They also seem to have been to Space World 99 in Japan and are banging on about Nintendo's all-new N64 games. So yeah, pretty standard N64 mag cover from the time, trying to cram as much as possible on there to get your attention. This page of N64 Magazine, issue 34 from back in November 99, proper retro this. Right, so what's going on? First off, you've got the editor, Tim Weaver, waffling on about Space World in Japan. Sounds like he had a bit of a jolly over there. He mentioned seeing Zelda Gaiden, Mario Adventure, Mother 3, and Kirby 64. Mother 3, blimey, that never even came out over here, did it? Anyway, apparently Rare phoned them up and asked if they wanted to preview Jet Force Gemini. Of course they did, everyone was gagging for that game. Then there's the news desk, page 12. Usual stuff, bit of Game Boy chat, chance to chinwag with Shigeru Miyamoto himself, or Shigs as they call him, cheeky sods. And a load of great tat, that's probably some naff toys they're banging on about. There's a picture of a Psyduck and some wrestler thing. Coming soon section, page 18, more Space World stuff, first look at Custom Robo, and something about a Bomberman sequel. Can't remember that Bomberman one now to be honest. Regular features, you know the drill. Information station for charts and stuff, N64 shopper, for imports, probably expensive as hell. Issue 35 preview, and a wish you were here section. Probably holiday snaps of readers, or something equally riveting. Big review for Jet Force Gemini on page 50, calling it a beauty of a shooty. Yeah, everyone was well up for that one, Rare were gods back then. Mario Golf gets a look in on page 58, flippin' ace they reckon. Bit strong, wasn't it just golf with Mario characters? Still, probably alright. In Fisherman Bass Hunter, page 62. Lee, it's fishing! Sounds like they're taking the mickey a bit. Actually, it's not bad. Fishing games, eh? Each to their own. Magical Tetris Challenge. On 64, page 64. Capcom doing Tetris. Wonder if that was any good. So, any good? They ask. Well, was it? Can't remember. Whinge. Import Arena. Kicks off on page 66. Japanese and American games, naturally. F-Cup, Maniacs, Neon, Genesis Evangelion. Capcom. Sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? Page 66. Then Ogre Battle 64 on page 70. That was a proper strategy RPG, wasn't it? Probably dead confusing. Sansaban. Planet Game Boy section. Martin's all glazy-eyed. Bit weird. Design AGB competition results on page 35. Bet some right odd designs came out of that. And next issue out on Wednesday the 3rd of November. Right, that's about the size of it then. This page of the magazine is all about what's coming up for the N64, and what's going on right now for us N64 owners back in the day. Right at the top is teasing future look stuff, with glimpses of Mother 3 still not sure what to make of that quirky RPG, Kirby 64 which looks like classic Kirby fun in 3D, and something called Super Mario Adventure, probably more Mario platforming goodness, you can't really go wrong there, can you? Then there's the Club 64 inches section, standard reader service bits and bobs, looks like a how-to guide for World Driver Championship Michael Owen the footballer, minus in WLS 2000, whatever that is, maybe football game related, and your usual mailbox answering reader questions, tips extra for cheat codes and tips, always handy, Dr. Kit's Game Clinic for gaming surgery advice, and a Nintendo hotline, bet that was busy back then. Game On with challenges for the best gamers, Skill Club 64 inches which is supposed to be platinum level hard, contact directory for meeting other gamers, and back issues and subscriptions if you missed an issue, like anyone would admit to that, Bruce. The big splash in the middle is the special investigation on Zelda Gaiden, which of course we now know as Majora's Mask. It's real! The sequel to Zelda is in development, it proclaims. Crikey, remember the rumors and hype? We've played it, they say, lucky devils. There's also a bit about Space World 99, Nintendo's big show in Japan, talking about Zelda Gaiden again of course, and then a strange piece titled, "Is Shadowman for real?" asking the FBI how they'd catch serial killers. Bit dark, innit? Warrant? Right at the bottom it points you to page 130 for a full contents index, so you can find your way around the rest of the mag. And yeah, November 1999? Good times. This page has a future look at some upcoming N64 games, blimey. Takes you back, doesn't it? Right on the cover they're teasing Mother 3, Kirby 64, and Super Mario Adventure. Seems like Mother 3 is the big one they're focusing on, reckon it's on page 6. Kirby 64's getting a look in on page 8, and Super Mario Adventure on page 10. Down the right side, there's a proper chunk about Mother 3. They've got an info burst bit that says it's from Nintendo. Cartridge size 256 megabit, remember those days? Single player. No memory or expansion pack needed. But Rumble Pack is a yes. Game Boy Pack is a no-go. Release dates are all over the place, TBA, for the US and UK. But apparently May in Japan. They're clearly quite excited about it, based on the anticipation rating. Looks like 5 red blobs filled in. Release date T. They've got some screenshots too, little boxes with captions. One shows these kids in a minecart flying past the moon. Bit like E.T. apparently. Another is Flint looking out over the ocean. Looks a bit desolate. Says something's supposed to burst from the water. Then there's a desert scene, says something's afoot there, and a forest shot where Flint's quests kick off, reckon something's lurking there too. They even reckon they've spotted a blue pig thing and a pink thing. Sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? Tech care. The writing reckons it's been ages in development, they were talking about it back in their first issue, said it was due late 97. Mad to think it was still being waited on years later. They say it's a proper role-playing game, nothing like Zelda genre-bending stuff. Focus is on wandering villages, chatting to people, and turn-based combat. Apparently it's all in 3D but still feels old-fashioned, like the old SNES Mother games. If you remember those, they say you'll feel right at home. Sounds alright, in a very retro kind of way. This page here, it's a look at Mother 3, or Earthbound 64 as it was known back then, in the Future Look section of the magazine. Right at the top we've got a few little captions over some screenshots. One mentions Pig Dance and calls it funky, another shows the pork bean hovercraft, which they reckon looks like a bean, fair enough. There's a conversation snippet in Japanese with a speech bubble, and a bit about Indiana Jones-style minecart rides. Then there's a point about trusting ladies with purple hair and backwards dresses, typical N64 mag humor from back then. They also mention the Pig Dance band again, calling them DCMC. Aha, ha, 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 ha. Underneath all that are more screenshots showing characters, and typical RPG-looking stuff. The page says it was played at Space World 99, which was always a big deal back then to see what Nintendo was showing off for the future. The main article is called HERB Mum's the Word, which is a bit of a weird title, even for then. It talks about the game having at least 10 playable characters, but at Space World they only played as a cowboy called Flint, his kids Klaus and Luca, and a dog called Boney. Sounds like a right ragtag bunch, doesn't it? Ooh. The visuals bit goes on about cutscenes with giant rideable dragons, minecart rides, and discos filled with jiving pigs, which sounds bonkers, even for a Japanese RPG. Apparently the game starts with Flint investigating something that lands near his house, and then exploring villages, canyons, and dungeons. They mention a pork bean hovercraft for getting around, calling it nonsensical humor, which is probably right. Combat in Mother 3 is menu-based, not like Zelda, and they're calling it hybrid hen-style traditional. Bit of an odd comparison, but alright. They say there are psychedelic skies and timed button presses in combat for stronger attacks. Sounds like they were trying something a bit different, which was always interesting. They also mention you can avoid combat by sneaking around enemies, which is a nice touch, not just endless random battles. Apparently, the final game is supposed to have loads of magic attacks and opponents, and they warn you not to overheat your head if you use too many. They reckon this section they played is only 50% complete, but even then they're calling it an absolute treat. It's to be continued, with more info promised as the Japanese release date gets closer. Always good to see what was coming over from Japan, especially something as quirky as Earthbound 64, or Mother 3 as it was properly called. This page is all about Kirby's Dream Land 64, for the N64, blimey that takes me back. It's got a big title splashed across it, Kirby's Dream Land, in huge yellow letters, calling it pretty in pink, which is a bit on the nose, innit? There are screenshots, looking a bit blocky now, to be honest, but back then it was cutting-edge 64-bit stuff. They are showing off Kirby's moves, like eating enemies and using a fridge as an attack, which the reviewer finds a bit daft, says it's one of his less useful attacks. There's also a bit where Kirby's on a bridge with jets of water underneath. Seems a bit precarious. They say careful here. One screenshot shows Kirby with King Dede and some star character, calling them his odd-looking friends. Another bit shows Kirby squaring up to some enemy, with a quote bubble saying, "I ain't come here to pray," and threatening to kick your ass. Bit strong for Kirby, isn't it? Underneath, they mention Kirby morphing into a slab of granite, typical Kirby madness. Down the bottom left, there's an info burst bit. It says it's from Nintendo, obviously, 128 megabit cart size. That sounds tiny now, doesn't it? Only one player, no memory pack, no expansion pack, Rumble pack yes, GB pack, no release date-wise TBA for the US and UK, but March in Japan. And they've given it a 4 out of 5 anticipation rating, so they were looking forward to it, just not going completely bonkers for it, mind. Issue 34 of N64 Magazine. There you go, a quick look at Kirby back in the day. This page is taking a look at Kirby 64, looks like a preview from Space World 99. Blimey, Space World, those were the days, eh? Seems like Nintendo were being a bit cagey about this one at the time, not even admitting it existed apparently. Anyway, this article is all about the visuals, reckons they are pretty fantastic. Like a more colourful Yoshi's story with some 3D backgrounds thrown in for good measure, lush forests and stained glass churches, bit fancy for a Kirby game, innit? Apparently it's a 2.5D platformer, so still mostly 2D gameplay, but with a bit of depth to the levels. Sounds alright keeping it simple. They mention Kirby's moves are still the same as the old SNES games, sucking up enemies and nicking their powers, and now you can mix and match abilities for even more chaos, and even turn into a fridge bizarre. Controls are supposed to be easy to pick up, which is always good for a Nintendo game. There are a few screenshots dotted around, logs, water, the usual sort of Kirby level stuff. Seems like they liked what they played and are looking forward to more. Says, to be continued, at the bottom, so I guess we'll have to wait for the next issue to get the full lowdown. November 1999, that was when this came out. Feels like a lifetime ago now, doesn't it? This page is a look at the new Super Mario Adventure game. Which, right, so it's Paper Mario then, isn't it? Looks a bit like they finally decided to give Mario a proper RPG on the N64. About time too, I reckon. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One of Yoshi's village, though they're cheekily asking what happened to Yoshi's Island. Bit harsh. Another shows Peach causing chaos in a library looking for hidden stars. Bless her. And then there's Mario on a train, in what they're calling Calamari Desert, driver's seat and all. Looks a bit of alright fun, that. Passy-ba-ki. They're saying it's got this mix of 2D characters on 3D backgrounds, which actually looks quite smart, can't grumble at that. Apparently, even Koopa and Goomba are playing nice with Mario for this one. Temporary truce, mind you, wouldn't trust them for a second. Yay. Info burst box says it's coming from Nintendo. Cartridge is a chunky 128 megabit, single player only, no memory pack or expansion pack needed, but Rumble pack is in, yes. Release dates are still to be announced for the US and UK, but Japan's getting it in January. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5, so they're pretty keen. Sounds promising enough. Might be worth keeping an eye on this one. This page is all about a preview for the new Mario RPG coming to the N64, which they're calling Super Mario Adventure. Seems like they're still a bit miffed that we Europeans missed out on the Super Mario RPG on the SNES back in '94, which, yeah, was a bit of a kick in the teeth, wasn't it? But anyway, this one's coming and it looks, well, different. The visuals are the main talking point, and they're not wrong, it's certainly something you hadn't really seen before. Cardboard Mario, in a polygonal world, bit odd at first glance, but apparently it works brilliantly. They're saying it's a joy to watch Mario waving from a train window, and they've used the phrase, fully polygonal train, which is peak late 90s hype, isn't it? It's based on a 50% complete version they saw at Space World 99, and they reckon it's shaping up nicely. It's aimed at younger players apparently, so the RPG elements are simplified, puzzles are easy, combat won't kill you, and it's all pretty linear. But they also say there's still plenty for grown-ups to enjoy, so that's good to hear. Apparently Mario can pull Koopa Troopers and Goombas out of his pockets. Sounds a bit bonkers. Combat is turn-based and menu-driven, but they mention you need to be quick with the A button for some moves and accurate with the analog stick for others. They've got some screenshots dotted around too. One shows Bowser and Peach, and they're surprised to see Kamek in an N64 game, which is fair enough, wasn't really expecting him. There's a shot of the item screen which is apparently simplified for kids, and another showing a card game against a Goomba, looks a bit like a minigame within the game. They also point out a shot of Mario about to wallop a Goomba with a mallet, uncomfortable mallet Goomba collision they've put. Bit dramatic, lads. And there's a whale and a train, with some typical 90s gaming magazine humor in the captions. Whale of a time, and a calamari train joke. You know the sort of thing. Anyway, to be continued it says at the end. So they'll have more on Mario's latest adventure later. Sounds like it could be a bit of alright actually. Even if it is a bit kiddified. RPG. We'll see. This page is all about the big news, the reveal of the next Game Boy, which they're calling the Game Boy Advance. Blimey. Super console in a handheld, they're saying. Bit much, isn't it? But still, it sounds pretty tasty. They're banging on about it being a 32-bit machine, which is a leap. In it? Apparently it'll have a screen showing 65,000 colors, same as the N64 apparently, which is rather good for a little handheld. Under the hood, it's got some fancy ARM processor, developed by the same folks who did the old BBC Micro, so some proper British tech in there, nice one. They're saying it'll do 3D graphics, maybe not N64 levels, but still 3D on a Game Boy? That's getting ahead of ourselves a bit. Gumra. Connections-wise, it's got a high-speed link port, and even a Dolphin socket, that's the code name for the GameCube, yeah? So they're hinting you'll be able to link it up to the home console, which could be interesting. Shoulder buttons are apparently highly likely because Shigsby loves them. Shigsby being Miyamoto, of course. Great for Mario Kart, they reckon, which, yeah, fair enough. Balver. They are speculating about a bigger widescreen format, 65,000 colors again, and more controls, maybe even a SNES-style 4-button layout. They reckon you'll be able to tilt the screen 90 degrees for a better view, which sounds a bit odd, but alright. They reckon it's out next August in Japan, so ages away yet. Still, fingers crossed it lives up to the hype. This page from N64 Magazine takes me right back. It's got a shortcuts section talking about game delays. Seems Perfect Dark, Rare's follow-up to GoldenEye, was pushed back along with Donkey Kong 64 and Jet Force Gemini. Disappointing news back then, but at least they reckoned Easter was guaranteed for something good. Then there's a bit about Game of the Year awards. Pikachu Genki Detchu, that voice recognition Pokemon game, won something, and Zelda got a visual prize alongside Final Fantasy V 2i on the PlayStation, apparently just missing out on the top award. Remember that Pikachu game? Quirky stuff, Ikita. They're also on about Game Boy download plan in Japan. You could download games at the supermarket onto a blank cartridge. Zelda DX and Donkey Kong Land were mentioned as available, a good idea if you were in Japan. Sadly not coming to the UK, it says. K. The main article is Show and Tell, about the ECTS show in London. Apparently it wasn't as amazing as the E3 show in Los Angeles, where they showed off Perfect Dark, Donkey Kong, Jet Force and Resident Evil 2. ECTS was a bit of a letdown apparently, apart from Castlevania 2 and Turok. Rage Wars, nothing new shown that hadn't been seen at E3. They even mentioned Eternal Darkness and Zelda Gaiden were no-shows, which was a shame as they sounded interesting. Seems like the Nintendo stand was massive though, loads of giant Pikachus about. They mentioned Tim and Jess from the mag even bumped into Howard Lincoln, Nintendo of America's Big Cheese, and had a Perfect Dark deathmatch with him. That's pretty cool. Finally, the N64 diary page has some release dates. Duke Nukem 0 Hour, out on the 8th of October finally, and Jet Force Gemini on the 29th of October. Both worth the wait apparently. Oh, and happy 39th birthday to Andrea it seems. Down the side there's an advert for Madasafish Internet, kick-ass game servers, unlimited email and web space, fast internet, no setup or subscription charges, free MP3 music, all for free if you call that number. Those were the days of free internet trials. This page from N64 Magazine issue 34 takes me right back to being a nipper eagerly awaiting the next issue. First up, there's a bit about a Shadow Man film in the works, starring Ice Cube no less. Bit random casting if you ask me, but hey, it was the 90s. They mention his previous comedy films, and Anaconda, which was unintentionally hilarious, they got that right. Rumors of a Turok movie too, John Voight as the lead, that's a strange one. Then there's a section called Manual Overdrive. Seems like they were having a go at WWF Attitude's training mode, saying it was a bit pointless and folks were already figuring out the moves for themselves. Fair point, who actually reads manuals these days anyway? There are some shortcuts mentioned too, but that's just a page reference. The main bit looks like Ask Shigsy, where you could send a question to Shigeru Miyamoto himself. Shigsy, Motes, the Shigster, all his nicknames. They big him up as the greatest games designer, creator of Donkey Kong, Metroid, Zelda 64, which they are still calling the best game in the world ever. They list a load of his other games, like Mario 2, Dolphin, Zelda Gaiden, and the Boy Advance. Bit cheeky asking what he eats for brekkie, or his favorite film, but I guess that's the kind of stuff kids would want to know. BD. And of course there's the N64 quiz, with a chance to win 50 quid. 10 questions, all the answers apparently hidden in the magazine somewhere. Questions like, sharks with fricking lasers on their heads, sounds like Austin Powers maybe? They ask about Samus Aran, black bass lure fishing scores, Link's new game, someone called Carlo shouting "Stop screaming Carlo," someone going mental on their damn A's, and a game where you make packing the midfield your priority. Then something about MOGSLIFE, 9 lives in a game, and the Fat Boy list. Finally, asking where to find Captain Cat Kit. Sounds like typical N64 Magazine quiz fodder. Bit random, bit silly, but fun. Closing date's the 7th of November, and the winner gets 50 quid fished from Paul's Locks, whatever that means. Last month's winner was Emma Cousins from Slough. Good luck to anyone who entered. 50 quid was a decent wedge back then. This page in N64 Magazine back in '99 was all about new goods, you know, the stuff you'd find in the shops alongside the games. First up, they've got these Star Wars Episode 1 keyrings, trying to cash in on the Phantom Menace hype, naturally. They reckon they're a bit deformed and cute, which sounds about right for tie-in merch back then. Not exactly high art, were they? Then there's a Darth Maul mask. Proper rubbery thing, they say it's good for scaring the cat, probably gives you a face full of condensation too though. Following that we have Austin Powers action figures, 6-inch jobbies of Austin and Dr. Evil. Spectacularly detailed they say, although they're a bit sniffy about them being static and only having one phrase of speech each. Seems a bit harsh, they're probably alright for posing on your shelf. Next it's a bashing brawler Hollywood Hogan, massive 2-foot wrestling figure. Sounds loud and annoying, but they admit the gut thing is still funny, which is fair enough. Wrestling figures were always a bit over the top. Then they move on to Pokemon flip cards. Remember those dinosaur ruler things? They're using the same idea for Pokemon. You tilt them, and they evolve. A bit of a gimmick, but they were cheap and cheerful, weren't they? And lastly, Pokemon bouncy balls. Basically the same bouncy balls you'd get from the newsagent, but with a Pokemon inside. They say they are cute. And well, they probably were, to be fair. At the bottom there's a competition to win Star Wars keyrings. Just gotta answer a simple question. Easy peasy. This page in N64 Magazine, oh yeah, it's bringing back memories. Right then, let's have a look. You squire. Up top there's something about an Australian Pokemon N64. Crikey! Apparently if you were down under you could get a special edition Pokemon themed N64, blue and yellow, with stickers, and even a matching controller. Bit much, isn't it? Still, for $199, Aussie Pokemon fans must have been chuffed. No plans for the UK though, it says. Typical. Worry. Next bit is about Pokemon. Right, Pokemon again then. This is about some strategy guides being released in America, Insider's Guide to Pokemon Tournaments, and Ultimate Pokemon Trading and Training Strategies, on tape no less. Presented by some bloke called Ernie Hudson, who's apparently second fiddle to Bill Murray. Okay then, Orintra. Down the side, Jason Moore is talking about UK tabletop games. He was always banging on about these, wasn't he? Says collecting them is hard work, 4 hours hunting, and he found a Grandstand Munchman tabletop. That's Pac-Man basically. He reckons Astro Wars are top of the pile, but Firefox is okay, and even Coleco Arcade ranges if you're flush. Important thing is battery covers and screen scratches apparently. And if it's boxed and with instructions, expect to pay extra. He's got a shop in Hendon now if you're interested, blimey. The main bit is your monthly reminder of the games that time forgot. This month it's Super Metroid for the SNES, or SNES if you're being poncy. Nintendo 1994, blimey it was a while back even then. They're saying it's been ages since we saw Samus Aran. And they're right. Cracking game Super Metroid. Very atmospheric, proper movie-like experience they reckon. Level designs are proper Nintendo style, apparently. Something about squeezing into a ball and grappling hooks, and blasting enemy robots. They reckon the only shortcoming was it was too compulsive, haha. Try telling that to my mum when I wouldn't come off it. And they mention Shigeru Miyamoto has let slip a new Metroid game is on the way. Well, we know how that turned out, eventually. Then there's Super Mario RPG, Nintendo 1996, so that's even older now. They say back in the dim and distant past, Nintendo had this disturbing habit of ignoring Europe. Right pain it was. The SNES was cleaning up in Japan and America, but we didn't always get the games. Smaller European market they say. Anyway, Super Mario RPG, they say it's a shame because it's a cracking game, developed by Square no less, before they got stuck into Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. Thoroughly enjoyable twist on Mario apparently, with puzzles and turn-based combat, designed for younger players but grown-ups liked it too. Loads of characters from the Mario universe, and cheeky in jokes. Mario humming the Super Mario Bros. Theme in the shower. Bowser nicking a Game Boy, that kind of thing. Says it's a shame there was no UK release for Super Mario RPG. Well, tell us something we didn't know. Mario fans in Japan and the US were happy though. Fingers crossed for a sequel when they finish Super Mario Adventure, whatever that is. Mark Green wrote that bit apparently, you wacko. Right, that's your lot. A nostalgic trip down memory lane with some old Nintendo games. Good times. This page in Planet 64 Mag, issue 34 it is having a look at mini races. Seems like they weren't too impressed with it at first, calling it a pile of old pants back in issue 30. Bit harsh maybe, but they're saying it's looking better now, especially the camera angles, which were apparently a right pain before. Yes, they reckon the multiplayer could be a laugh, comparing it to Micro Machines, hoping the camera is better this time around. And they mention a track editor too, which sounds like it could add some legs to the game. Endless racing, they're saying. Looking at the info burst bit, it's coming from Nintendo, naturally, and it's a 96 megabit cart. 1 to 4 players, memory and expansion packs are a no-go, rumble packs in, GB packs out. Coming out November everywhere apparently, and they're giving it a decent anticipation rating, 3 red blobs out of 4. They're saying mini races is like Revolt but with radio-controlled cars in 2-player. Overall they think it's better than they first thought and more promising than a few months back. So, fingers crossed it's alright when it finally appears, eh? On the side there's a quick Jump to section highlighting other games in the mag, Knockout Kings 2000 on page 20, Worms on page 24, Bomberman 2 on 25 and Rocket on 26. Just quick previews by the looks of it. There's a few screenshots of mini races gameplay, and one with a purple bear-like character in a tiny car. Looks a bit odd, doesn't it? But yeah, seems like mini races is the main focus here. This page, right then, is having a look at Custom Robo. Seems like they're trying to figure out what pigeonhole to stick it in, calling it a bit of everything Pokemon, RPG, action. They reckon with Pokemon being massive, everyone's trying to jump on the bandwagon, but this Custom Robo, made by Nintendo themselves mind you, is trying to be its own thing, mixing in virtual on-style robot battles. Gee. Apparently you don't collect loads of robots like Pokemon, instead you have just one, called Lee, and you super up with new bits and bobs you buy. So you're not exactly catching them all, more like pimping your one robot to be the best. The story mode is about becoming the custom robo-champ, naturally, and there's a 2-player mode to batter your mates. They mention the arenas are a bit like Virtual On, multi-layered with bits to hide behind and snipe from. Sounds a bit more involved than just standing in a field bashing away. They had a go with a couple of weapons, Flammigun and Tomahawk Bomb, which sounds decent enough. There's a bit of a Q&A section, clarifying that it's not a Pokemon clone in the monster collecting sense, more about upgrading your single robot. They ask if it's like Virtual On, and yeah, sounds like it is a bit with the arenas and weapons. And they're wondering if it will be as long as Pokemon, reckon maybe not, but say it plays well and could be popular in Japan. Pai. Down at the bottom there's an info burst Nintendo are publishing, no kidding, and it's a 128 megabit cart. 1 or 2 players, Rumble Pack is a yes but no to the rest of the packs. Due out in November, and they seem pretty hyped about it, giving it a good anticipation rating. Looks alright I suppose, could be a bit of alright robot bashing fun. One of the screenshots looks a bit SNEZ, to be fair. This page is from an old N64 mag, back when they were covering all the new stuff coming out. Looks like they're previewing Knockout Kings 2000. Right then, boxing on the N64, interesting. Buksaya, they've got a Q&A section at the top. Someone's asking if it's as good as wrestling games. The reviewer's having a bit of a laugh saying there's no throwing bins over heads or spandex, just simple fisticuffs. Sounds alright, simple punching but with variety. And you can batter someone until they get cuts and bruises and start swaying about. Bit gruesome maybe, but realistic I suppose. Then there's a section called Sounds a Bit Simple to Me and Realism then. It's like they're preempting the reader's thoughts. Joystick waggling to get up when knocked down, typical. And, it's not Smash Bros though, is it? Cheeky. No. No it's not. Well spotted, huh. Down below, the main review bit starts, as pleased as punch. They were busy with Zelda, Gaiden, which must be Majora's Mask then, when Knockout Kings 2000 popped up as a surprise. They reckon it's good for a boxing game, mentioning Ali, Leonard Spinks and Sugar Ray Robinson, some proper boxing legends. Tim, whoever he is, likes starving Marvin Hagler. They say no George Foreman or Mike Tyson though, shame, but still a pretty comprehensive package. Control-wise, it's good for beginners, but has depth for better players too. A and B are your basic punches, hold down R to hook, C buttons for combos, and Z to block. Power bar fills up, then R and B for a haymaker. Nice. Analog stick, for moving and punch locations. They're unsure about the single-player career mode, typical reviewer hedging their bets. Screenshot-wise, we can see some of the creator boxer mode, proper customization, even a green afro. Another shot shows the in-game action, looks alright for the time, bit blocky obviously. Replay mode is highlighted too, always good for a laugh watching someone get knocked out. Kickerbagger. Info burst box gives the game details, 128, meg cart, 1 or 2 players, memory palmgun rumble park yes, expansion palmgun GB palmgun no, coming out in November here, and TBA for Japan, with a 3 out of 5 anticipation rating. Not bad, not amazing. Overall they reckon it's simple punching but fun, and the multiplayer is where it's at, especially the creator player mode. Rivals WWF attitude apparently for freak making. You can make a 20-stone monster with a 5-foot blonde afro. Madness. They've saved a mutie to the controller pack and might fight a mate with it. Or just play the career mode and batter Muhammad Ali. Not bad at all. Fingers crossed we'll have a review next month. Sounds like they're cautiously optimistic then. This page has got a bit of a look at Winback, which was a game doing the rounds at the time. There's a Q&A section where they're chatting about it, and they seem quite impressed, saying it's got plenty to do, even if the story sounds a bit like your typical mad dictator scenario. They mention you're rescuing secret agents and that, and apparently Jean-Luc, who I guess is the main bloke, has got over 2,000 animations, which sounds like a lot of effort, doesn't it? They do have a bit of a dig at the graphics, calling them a bit ropey. Mind you, they say Body Harvest was a bit like that too, but turned out alright. Then they get onto the deathmatch mode, which Nintendo are doing, making it a 4-player ruckus. Sounds like a laugh with all the sneaky moves and big guns. The main bit reckons Winback has won them over. Apparently it looked a bit shabby at first glance, but after having a proper go on it, they changed their tune. They reckon it could be a mix of GoldenEye and Metal Gear Solid, which are big names to drop. They mention Body Harvest again as a graphics comparison point, and it sounds like Winback is looking a bit better. They played it at Space World, and reckon it's coming out in October. Jean-Luc Cougar is our hero, and he's got all these secret agent moves, like hiding against walls and spinning around corners with his laser pistol, you know the sort of thing. Apparently you can duck and roll between cover and all that, and the enemies aren't daft either, reacting to noises and movement. And yeah, they've confirmed a 4-player deathmatch mode with all sorts of weapons. There are screenshots dotted about showing bits of the game, explosions and all that. There's a little info box saying it's from Koei, 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, no memory or expansion pack needed, but Rumble Park is a yes. Release dates are down for October in the US and Japan, and Christmas in the UK, with a decent anticipation rating, 4 out of 5 blobs. And yeah, they point out Jean-Luc's moves. The team names are Jean-Luc, Bob, Jane and Terry, and they say the cutscenes are good even if there's no talking, and they mention targeting, explosions, weapons and the 4-player mode in captions. So yeah, that's Winback then, looking like it could be a bit of alright. This page of the magazine is all about previews for upcoming games. First up, we've got Roadsters Trophy from Titus. Looks like they're trying to do a racing game with posh motors like Lamborghinis and Porsches. The screenshots show some pretty colourful tracks, jungle vibes and that sort of thing. They're going on about how clean it all looks. Almost too clean maybe. Not like the grimy racers we were used to back then like Ridge Racer or World Driver. Apparently the code for the Lamborghini was kicking about for ages, which is a bit of an odd fact. It's meant to be out next month, October it says, so probably just missed it then. Then there's Mario Party 2, more minigames, unsurprisingly after the first one. They say there's 64 minigames this time around. They mention a couple of them, one that sounds like a quick draw type thing with Mario and Luigi, and another one with balloons attached to carts in an arena, a bit like the battle mode in Mario Kart. They also mention new characters and a storyline, but reckon Bowser's still up to no good kidnapping Princess Peach, or invading Mario Land as they put it. Vastly different, they joke. It's down as coming out in December. Space World 99, eh? Those were the days. This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's all about Worms Armageddon coming to the N64. Remember Worms? It's been around for ages. Proper old school PC game really. Gianna. There's a Q&A section. Bit of a chat. Apparently there are about 10 billion levels, which sounds like a slight exaggeration, but they reckon it's because everything's randomly generated. Layouts, worm positions, the lot. So yeah, loads of levels then. They reckon the single player is surprisingly good. Seems Infogrames have made the computer worms a bit less smart, so we can actually win for a change. Controls sound alright, C buttons for moving your worm and aiming, analog stick for camera, easy weapon access with the R button. Simple enough. They even have a bit saying, "But I hate worms," and then a punchline. "You won't after playing this, believe it." Bit cheesy, but alright. Then there's a proper preview article, more exclusive shots of Infogrames Wrigley Wonder. The writer starts off saying, they've always hated worms since the Amiga days. 5 years ago, blimey, time flies. But they've had a half hour with this N64 version, and they're changing their tune. They reckon it might be one of the N64's best multiplayer games. Tall turn-based teams of worms, loads of weapons, you know the drill. Pink worms getting blown up and kicked, good old fun. They mention loads of weapons like Dragon Punch, Blowtorch, and all sorts, and you can see the weapon and safety goggles when you choose one. Nice touch. Only real problem they found is you can't zoom out to see the whole map, which might make aiming tricky with some weapons. They reckon if Infogrames fix that before November, when it's out, it should be spot on. Down the side there's an info burst box, listing stuff like cart size, 128 megabits, how many players, 14, memory pack yes, rumble pack yes, all the usual stuff. Release dates are November for UK and US, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 red blobs out of 5, so they're quite looking forward to it then. Rindorkus. Screenshots wise, yeah, typical worms really. Little worm blokes on daft landscapes, exploding sheep, bazookas, you know what to expect. There's one with a big cow looking a bit bemused, and another showing the weapon selection screen. Looks like classic Worms chaos on the N64. Might actually be decent then. This page in N64 Magazine is all about Bomberman 64 too, and they are really going on about it being better than the first Bomberman 64, which they didn't seem too keen on, calling it a bit of a bum-deadening tosh, strong words. Apparently the first one was a bit rubbish for multiplayer, which for a Bomberman game that's a bit of a cardinal sin, isn't it? Anyway, Bomberman 64 2 is trying to fix things, and it looks like they've listened to feedback. They are banging on about the multiplayer being good this time, with 4-player split screen, and classic deathmatches like the good old SNES Bomberman games. There's also some kind of time attack mode, where 4 players race to finish a level, which sounds a bit different. Borington. Looks like they've tarted up the graphics, it's all in 3D now like they were saying, and they've even added new bombs, abilities and vehicles. It all seems a bit much if you ask me. Sometimes simple is best with Bomberman. There's a little Q&A bit where they're talking about the deathmatches and split screen, and when it's out they're saying December in Japan and spring for us lot in the UK. The anticipation rating is pretty high, they've given it 4 out of 5 of those little red circles, so they must be quite hopeful. Looks like they are calling it the best Bomberman game yet. Bit early to say that, isn't it? Still, it's Bomberman, can't go too far wrong, can you? This page from N64 Magazine, issue 34, kicks off with some industry gossip and a preview of a new game. On the left side, under an ear to the ground, it's all about the recent Space World event. Apparently Sony was showing off the PlayStation 2, but Nintendo was keeping very quiet about their new console, Dolphin. No sign of a Metroid game either at the show, which the magazine reckons just fuels the rumors about Dolphin even more. They rattle off a list of games that are meant to be in development, like Zelda Gaiden, Super Mario Adventure, Kirby 64, Mother 3, and those 6 4DD games, remember those? Perfect Dark gets a mention. Apparently it will work with the expansion pack, but the release date seems to be slipping, as per usual. They also had a quick go on Ridge Racer 64, and it sounds like it's a bit of a letdown. Apparently, a bit crap, according to their spies in Europe. Flipping over to the right, there's a preview of a game called Rocket, Robot on Wheels. Apparently it used to be called Sprocket, but they had to change the name because of some trademark or copyright issues. Probably some other company already had a Sprocket kicking about, maybe even a dog from Fraggle Rock, they joke. It's from a developer called Sucker Punch, and is due out in January 2000. They describe it as a quirky and original 3D platformer. They seem impressed with the physics engine and a tractor beam mechanic. Apparently one of the mission objectives even involves throwing sheep into a river to use them as stepping stones. Which sounds a bit mad, doesn't it? There's an info burst box that says it's from Ubisoft, a 128 meg cart, single player, uses memory and rumble packs but not the expansion or Game Boy pack. Release is still January, and they're giving it a decent anticipation rating, 4 out of 5 blobs. There are a few screenshots dotted around showing the game in action too. Tremendous. More soon, they say. The next page in this issue is all about Zelda Gaiden, which we now know as Majora's Mask. Back then it was a massive deal, being touted as the sequel to Ocarina of Time, you know, best game ever territory. This special investigation sent some lucky sod to Space World in Japan to actually play it. Bit jealous, I have to admit. Probably queued for hours just to get a go. Looking at the page, you've got this moody artwork, proper creepy stuff with Skull Kid, and that moon, definitely a different vibe from Ocarina. They've got a little info burst table there, laying out the details. Seems it's a 256 meg cart, single player only, no memory pack needed, but you'll want the expansion pack and rumble pack for the full experience. Apparently it was slated for a worldwide release in March, and judging by their anticipation rating of 5 Red Bulls, they were pretty hyped for it, and rightly so I suppose. Everyone was gagging for more Zelda back then. They're calling it an add-on sequel to Ocarina, which is a bit of an understatement really, considering how different it turned out to be. They reckon it's taking us to an alternative Hyrule, which was intriguing at the time. Yeah, this was big news, this page. Big news indeed. This page is having a look at Zelda Gaiden, which is Majora's Mask to you and me, back in '99. They're running through the plot, which if you remember, kicks off with Link just riding Epona through the woods when suddenly this masked bloke pops up, nabs Epona, and disappears through a doorway. Bit rude that. So Link follows him and ends up in some weird alternate version of Hyrule. Bit of a downer for Link really, as this Hyrule is facing total annihilation from the moon, crashing down to Earth. Sounds cheerful, doesn't it? Apparently, the big clock tower in the main town is counting down to disaster. Crashing goo. Then there's a bit about the music in Gaiden. They're saying it expands on the Ocarina of Time music, which is fair enough, and there are loads of instruments to use, other than just the ocarina, which go with the masks you can wear. They show off the Deku horn, saying when you're a Deku scrub you can use this trumpet thing, which is like a gramophone-style instrument, owned by the windmill bloke in Ocarina. And then there's the Goron drums. As a Goron you can bash these bongo drums, and apparently these race-specific instruments help you persuade the parallel universe Gorons to stop the moon falling. Right then, they reckon the drums will be useful for getting around different places, like in Ocarina. So, more instruments then, sounds like a right old musical adventure. The next page in this issue takes a look at this new Zelda game everyone's banging on about, Zelda Gaiden, which we now know as Majora's Mask. Seems the big gimmick this time is masks, and not just for a laugh like in Ocarina. Apparently there are about 20 of the things, and when Link puts one on he properly transforms into something else, with all the skills that go with it. They're showing off 3 masks in particular. First up is the Zora Link, turning him into one of those fishy blokes. Looks like you get some speed in the water and can do a bit of swordplay underwater too. There's even a beaver minigame using Zora Link, which sounds Warrington also many not thrilling, got beta. Then there's Goron Link, who becomes one of those rock-munching fellas. Apparently he's proper strong and can roll into a ball like a spiky hedgehog. Good for shifting boulders and generally being a bit tougher. They point out the green hood to tell him apart, which is helpful. In it. What? Warrington. Lastly, they mention Deku Scrub Link. This one's a bit odd. Turning Link into a, well, Deku Scrub. Seems a bit rubbish at first glance, but he can shoot nuts from his face, glide on flowers, and even walk on water. Might be more useful than it sounds, I suppose. They are suggesting using him to reach high places using flowers, like those jump pads in Banjo-Kazooie, which is a bit of a random comparison, but alright. Honest. Overall it seems this mask thing is the main focus of the game. It's certainly a bit different to what we're used to in Zelda, but could be a laugh, I suppose. We'll have to wait and see if all these transformations are any good when we get our hands on it. This page then, it's all about Zelda Gaiden, which we now know as Majora's Mask, back when it was still under wraps a bit. Right at the top, they're pondering how you even follow up Ocarina of Time, like it was the impossible task, which at the time, fair enough, it felt like it. They mention Shig's, old Shigeru Miyamoto himself, being involved, so you knew it was going to be something proper. Apparently, Gaiden, or Majora's Mask, is pitched as a side story, running parallel to Ocarina but in an alternate version of Hyrule. The big thing is this falling moon that's gonna crash and end everything if you don't sort it out. So Link's gotta use masks to get help from different characters, and if you mess about too long, it's game over. Sounds a bit stressful, doesn't it? They mention the time limit being a sundial at the bottom of the screen, which is a nice touch. Monster Mash section talks about familiar faces like Zoras and Gorons returning, but also new beasties like maniating swamp plants and massive jelly blobs. Lovely. They also reckon we'll see a dark version of Navi, which sounds intriguing, or annoying, depending on how you felt about Navi back then. There are screenshots dotted about showing off bits of gameplay, like Link using masks, some bosses that look a bit dodgy, and new areas including snowy mountain villages. They haven't seen new weapons yet, but the game's only half finished according to them. And yet Epona's back too, of course she is. They mention the expansion pack being used to boost the frame rate and have more on-screen detail, which is fair enough, given what they were trying to cram in. They're expecting it worldwide in March 2000 and reckon it'll be a big deal. Certainly was, wasn't it? This page is from the N64 Planet Game Boy Magazine, issue 9, from November 1999. It's shouting about the big games in this issue, Zelda and Pokemon, both on pages 37 and 36 respectively. Zelda is about Link's amazing new triple quest, sounding like a proper adventure, and Pokemon is about checking out the new faces in the Japanese super sequels, likely Gold and Silver we were all waiting for. Then there's this thing called the Art of Boys, some kind of competition where they've had designs, and they are revealing which design made it to the national final. Seems a bit random, but hey, it's the late 90s. They've got a reviews section covering the biggest and best Game Boy reviews, including Disney's Tarzan, which was probably alright for a movie tie-in. There's another game with a screenshot, Looks like some kind of submarine game, depth something or other. And of course it wouldn't be Game Boy Mag without news, reviews and tips for your Game Boy Color, pocket camera and printer, basically everything to keep you kitted out. Oh, and there's a competition to win a brand new Game Boy with your Game Boy camera pics, which was probably quite the prize back then. This page from Planet Game Boy Mag, back in '99, is all about the upcoming Pokemon sequels, Gold and Silver. Remember those days? We were still waiting for Red and Blue to properly land over here in the UK, and the Japanese were already getting the next games. Typical. The article's buzzing about how these new Pokemon games were unveiled at Space World, which must have been quite the event for Pokemon fans. Apparently these games are sequels to the first ones on the Color Game Boy, and they're promising loads of new stuff. They mention 100 brand new monsters. Crikey, another 100 to learn. Some had already been shown in the cartoon apparently, including this fluffy blue mouse thing called Mariru, which they reckon is like a new Pikachu. Alright then. There's a picture of this new high-tech Pokédex. Looks a bit like a chunky watch. They're saying you can collect items and use them in battles now, which is a bit different. And the games have a clock built in, so Pokemon might refuse to fight if it's their bedtime. Bonkers. Apparently you can breed Pokemon now, and these eggs hatch into Pokebabies. Sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? And this Professor Oak bloke has come up with a watch-like gadget called the Pokegear. Bit like Ash uses in the cartoon, to organize your monsters and chat to mates in other towns. The reviewer is clearly quite excited, saying they want the silver version right away. They also point out it still looks like the old games, visually, which is probably a good thing for some, and reckon it's a good thing too. And then there's a little yellow triangle at the bottom saying we won't see these games over here until Easter 2001. Easter 2001? Honestly, absolutely shocking, they say. Yep, sounds about right for Nintendo release dates back then. Still, at least we had Pocket Pikachu, Pokemon Pinball, new downloads, Pokemon Yellow, and all sorts of other Pokemon tat to keep us going until then apparently. Oh, and the 32-bit Game Boy Advance was on the horizon too. Busy times for Pokemon, weren't they? This page of Planet Game Boy Magazine is all about upcoming games. First up, we've got Zelda on the Game Boy. Nintendo are bringing out 3 new Zelda games apparently. One of them is called Fruit of the Mystical Tree, and they finally revealed the other 2 titles are Fruit of Power and Fruit of Wisdom. Fruit seems to be the theme, doesn't it? They're releasing them separately, one at a time, and you can link them up using a cable, which is a bit of a novelty. The reviewer thinks it looks a bit too similar to Link's Awakening if you ask me, but they're still saying Nintendo might make it something special. There's a screenshot showing Link near some water and vines, and another picture of what they reckon is either a health fairy or an evil witch, and there's even a boxing kangaroo mentioned. Sounds a bit bonkers for a Zelda game. Next up is Terry's All Gold. Now this is actually Enix's Dragon Warrior Monsters, but they've changed the name for the UK release. Surprise, surprise. It's coming out in December, and it's essentially their attempt at a Pokemon game, but they reckon it's got some interesting twists. Apparently you can breed monsters to create even stronger ones, and they're boasting about 215 monsters, and loads of breeding combinations. You can battle your mates, but if you lose a fight, you lose your monsters to your opponent. Which is a bit rough if you ask me. They are saying the monsters are a bit scarier than Pokemon, and looking at the screenshots, they do look a bit more gruesome. Might be worth a look if you're still on the monster collecting bandwagon, and it's also due out in December. This page then features a couple of reviews for games on the old Game Boy. First up is Tarzan. Seems like your typical platformer back then, all about swinging through trees and collecting bananas. They reckon it's a bit of alright, praising the graphics and comparing it favorably to other Game Boy platformers at the time. Looks like you can play as Tarzan and his mate, some sort of monkey sidekick. They even mention a 2-player hide-and-seek mode, and a paint shop thing, which sounds a bit random. They gave it a solid 4 stars, so not bad for a bit of monkeying around. Then there's Black Bass Lure Fishing. Crikey, fishing games, eh? This one sounds a bit dull, to be honest. They're banging on about using intuition to find fish and how long it took to get a screenshot of even a single fish. Doesn't sound like a barrel of laughs, does it? They gave it a measly 2 stars, reckon they'll be sticking with River King instead. Probably a wise choice. Fishing games were never really my cup of tea. Too much like real fishing, only less rewarding. This page opens with a review for Ants on the Game Boy Color, from Infogrames. It's priced at £20, which seems about right for a new Game Boy game back then. The reviewer notes it's another platformer from Infogrames, becoming a bit of a habit, following in the footsteps of games like Smurfs. They say it's well presented, though not as good looking as Lucky Luke on the Color, mentioning the ants themselves are a bit freaky looking the way they walk. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty standard platforming fare, collecting items and rescuing other ants. They mention a bit where ants make a ladder for you, which sounds a bit novel. Overall, they say it's better than Bugs Life on Game Boy, but there were a lot of superior platformers around at the time, giving it a score of 3 out of 5 stars. Below that is a review for Madden NFL 2000 Feet on Game Boy Color, from THQ, priced at £25. They mention Midway already tried and failed with American football on Game Boy with NFL Blitz, and this is THQ's attempt, a conversion of Madden. They say it's Madden in miniature, and they like it. There's a screenshot showing a game in progress with the Broncos, and some play formations mentioned. The review mentions it has lots of stats, teams and moves you'd expect from a Madden game, but speed is missing compared to NFL Blitz. The control system takes getting used to, typically Madden-like, and a practice mode would have been handy. They say if you overcome the learning curve, it's a decent football game, though maybe not as deep as the N64 versions. They give it 3 out of 5 stars as well, and mention the Vikings are doing alright in the league tables shown, suggesting they might make the playoffs. Seems like both games got a solid, but not amazing score. This page showcases the winners of an Art of Boys competition from the magazine, asking readers to create artwork based on the Game Boy Color. Looks like they got a fair few entries, judging by the text, Game Boy Car. The first prize went to Kate Hindley for what they are calling ultra-cute Mario and Link Game Boy clothing. Essentially, she's made little felt outfits for the Game Boy, styled as Mario and Link. They reckon they are practical, made of soft material for sensitive skin, and the hats stop dust. Sounds a bit much for a Game Boy case, but fair play. First prize winner must have impressed them. Second prize went to George Meredith for a design that features Nintendo characters and a Union Jack. They're calling it technically accomplished, which suggests it might be a bit more involved than the felt cases. Can't really see much detail on the picture, but it got second prize, so well done, George. Then we have the runner-up section. Carol Harrison made a Darth Maul Game Boy accessory, which they are calling a clubwear/Game Boy warmer. Bit odd, but okay. Apparently it has pockets for games carts and would scare the pants off Ewan McGregor. Bit strong that, isn't it? Richard Nobes is another runner-up with a Pikachu-shaped Game Boy. They reckon it would be a collector's item if it was released. Yeah, maybe for the hardcore Pokemon lot. It's got a Pikachu face cover. Seems like a bit of an obvious choice, Pikachu, but it's a runner-up, so it's done the job. And finally, Oliver Bolton is a runner-up for the man-eating sludge monster from Pluto Game Boy case, described as a race of creatures descended from rotten eggs. Right then. Apparently he's a dab hand at Tetris DX. Good for him. Overall, it's a bit of fun, this page. Remember the days of decorating your consoles? Seems like a lifetime ago now. Good on these kids for giving it a go and winning something. Probably a t-shirt and bragging rights, knowing N64 Mag back then. This page is from Planet Game Boy Magazine, back when the Game Boy Color was still fairly new, and we were all excited for the next big Nintendo handheld. It's a tips and scores page, covering a few different games, handheld. First up, there's James Bond 007. Looks like they're giving some tips for the casino mini-games, Blackjack, Baccarat and Red Dog, and a free medkit trick. Remember those days of hunting for every advantage you could get? It also mentions something about blocking while searching to move around, a bit of a sneaky shortcut there. Then there's Paperboy. Paperboy on the Game Boy, a classic. It's got a cheat to get all bikes. Seems a bit convoluted. You have to turn sharply left after your bike starts moving, and then press a button sequence. Typical old school cheat codes, weren't they? Cammy. Next up is A Bug's Life. This game was probably trying to cash in on the movie hype back then. They've got a list of passwords to skip levels. Pretty handy if you were stuck on a particularly annoying bit in what they call this amateurish platform travesty. A bit harsh maybe. And finally, Men in Black. This one has cheat mode and level skip access codes. You enter 0601 for cheat mode and you can move in all directions and get the best weapon, and 2409 for level skip. Access codes for levels are also listed, like 2710, 1807, 0309, and so on. Remember writing these codes down in your notepad? Voo! At the side, there's a high scores section, always good to see if your name made it in. They've got Mario Deluxe scores, with Dave Hartley and Andy Scheuber getting top spots, then Challenge and Superplayer modes, which were apparently harder to beat. Tetris DX scores are there too, for both 40 lines and Ultra modes. Richard Ford and Nick Beckak seem to be doing well in Tetris. Marathon mode scores for level 0 and level 9 are listed, with Paul Curtis topping level 9. Then there's the Game & Watch Gallery Donkey Kong and Parachute scores, with Jonathan Denny and Mark via email at the top for those. Chef and Helmet scores round it off. Finally, they're asking for scores to be sent in. Good old snail mail to Planet Game Boy Magazine or email n64@futurenet.co.uk. Feels like a lifetime ago now, doesn't it? This page is all about the Game Boy camera, blimey, remember that thing? It's the Game Boy Gallery, and they've got a load of pictures sent in by readers, proper lowers pixelated madness. Looks like they had a competition. The winner is Dean Bycroft, apparently good at making hand animals for kids' parties, and his pumpkin-headed thing got him top spot. There are loads of other pictures featured too, like one from Andrew Hyland, which is a zombie from a George Romero film, made by a Paul Hakarevich. Then there's a Mrs. Frankenstein picture by Emma Bayno, bit of a flowery headband on that one. Someone called Andrew Shapaniak made a two-headed creation, sounds charming. Francis Walker's picture from East Kilbride is apparently only a mother could love, vacant stare and all that. They mention a walrus John Tucker, wonder what his picture is like, and someone from Sweden called Cecilia made pictures with pencils, which sounds a bit odd for a Game Boy camera gallery, but there you go. There's talk of stomach-churning pictures, so it was a bit of a freak show by the sounds of it. Jason Frost's picture from Down Under is about dodgy shrimps and UFOs, classic stuff. And Richard and Andrew Granville sent in something called Jeff Evil. Very odd indeed. It's all a bit of a laugh really, celebrating the unique artistry of the Game Boy camera users of the time. They want more pictures sent in, so if you've got any knocking about, they want your freaks. Nice. Send them in to Planet Game Boy at N64 Magazine in Bath. Right then. This page delves into the rumors surrounding the 64DD, Nintendo's disk drive add-on for the N64, at Space World 99 in Tokyo. It seems back then there were whispers that the 64DD might be dead in the water, but this article suggests that reports were a bit exaggerated. They're talking about how Nintendo has been working on this thing for ages, promising bigger and better games, and add-on discs for existing titles. Games like Ocarina of Time, Resident Evil 2 and Mother 3 were all apparently meant for the 64DD originally, but ended up on cartridges instead. It mentions the first Japanese release date for the 64DD being December 1st, so it was still kind of a big deal at this point. The page has pictures of the N64 console itself, and the 64DD unit that slots underneath, plus a 64DD disc in its case. There's also a big splash image at the top with Mario and Yoshi riding controller-shaped vehicles, promoting Space World 99, with the tagline played at SPACEWORLD 99. It feels like they're trying to reassure us that the 64DD is still something to look forward to, even though it had been talked about for donkey's years already, and most of us were probably just happy playing cartridge games at this point. This page in the mag is doing a bit of an investigation into upcoming 64DD games. First up, it's Doshin the Giant. They're saying if you doubted the 64DD, seeing this big yellow bloke lumbering about should shut you up. It's about playing as Doshin, this massive giant, and doing good or bad deeds in a village. Good deeds get you hearts to grow, bad deeds shrink you. Sounds a bit odd, bit like messing about with Lego figures really, but they say it's breathtakingly original. Then there's SimCity 64. Apparently even Doshin isn't the only giant around, because Mario is stomping about in this version of SimCity. It's in 3D, which is a big deal compared to the SNES version we had, and you can zoom right down to street level. They're banging on about seeing cars with headlights and pedestrians with faces a bit much maybe, but it does sound like a proper step up for SimCity on consoles, though I suppose we'll still be struggling with confusing graphs and taxes like always. Finally, they've had a go on the F-Zero X expansion kit. They're well chuffed with it, calling it everything they hoped for. It's a track editor, so you can make your own courses, put in jumps, tunnels, even those dodgy tubes from Big Blue. They made a truly horrific course and crashed, naturally. There's also a create machine mode where you can mess about with spoilers and wings and paint jobs. Sounds like you could waste hours on that. Apparently you can save loads of cars and courses, so the potential is limitless. Their words, not mine. They've even chucked in 2 new cups for the main game. Not bad at all. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at what the 64DD has to offer. It's all about the Studio Trilogy games, which are supposed to be creative titles. First up is Paint Studio, which they reckon is like proper PC image manipulation software. Sounds like you can mess about with brushes, shapes, textures, and add effects. Swirl, emboss, pixelate, all that jazz. Apparently you can even make animations and muck about with pre-made 3D scenes. Then there's Polygon Studio, which is the 3D version of Paint Studio, using cubes and cylinders and whatnot. You pull on the analog stick to shape things, and then slap textures on them. They even mention creating a 3D Pikachu, which, fair enough, sounds like something Nintendo would show off at the time. Tech Studio. Talent Studio is a bit of a weird one. You need a photo of your face, which you can get in via a capture card. Sounds like a faff. Then you can stick your mug onto a 3D body and make it dance or play baseball or whatever. They reckon it's probably just for the Japanese market, which is probably fair. Can't see too many blokes down the pub being desperate to put their faces on a digital wrestler. The article then talks about how these maker games are alright on their own, but could be great if you could use your creations in other games. They seem to think Nintendo has big plans for the 64DD, which we'll see about. Below that is And the Rest, talking about other 64DD games. Ultimate War is a strategy game, where you can watch battles in 3D. Sounds a bit ambitious for the time, but they seem impressed by the eye-splinteringly sharp 3D. Then there's Japan Pro Golf Tour, a golf game, and Yusuke Aide's Mahjong School, which is Mahjong for beginners with a TV personality. Yusuke Aide. Right up my street, that one. This page is a proper blast from the past, isn't it? It's an N64 Arena page, talking about the latest game reviews. Right in the middle, you've got a big feature on Jet Force Gemini. Rare were on top form back then, and it was all about shooting bugs, splattering them all over the place. Good times. Then there's Mario Golf, finally getting a pale release. The reviewer is asking if it's still the king of the swingers. Cheeky. Below that, in Fisherman Bass Hunter, they reckon you might be fishing forever. Bit of a sarcastic take on that one. Magical Tetris Challenge, with Mickey Mouse, apparently mind-blowing, whatever you say. F-Cup Maniacs, or Fighter's Destiny 2 if you prefer, they're calling it. Neon Genesis Evangelion, giant robots punching each other. And finally, Ogre Battle 3, which they say is a strategy game dressed up as an RPG, a bit odd apparently. Hurrah. Down at the bottom there's a section for Import Arena, games they are playing in America and Japan. Always good to see what you might be missing out on. Classic N64 Magazine page, reviewing all the latest and greatest. This page then, right, it's all about how N64 Magazine reviews games. It kicks off explaining their review process, saying they're proper gaming experts who play games to completion, which is fair enough. You'd hope so, wouldn't you? Then there's an essential information bit, like a quick guide to their reviews. They have an info burst section with game stats, like for a game called Kickle Cubicle 64 inches by Nintendo. Apparently it's a 510 megabit cart, one player, and uses a Rumble Pack standard N64 stuff really. It's meant to be out in April, in the US, May here, and November in Japan, costing 40 quid. Seems pricey. Then if you're in a rush, they've got pluses and minuses, and if you like this, sections. Pluses and minuses, easy enough, good and bad bits. If you like this, gives you similar games. For example, if you liked GoldenEye, you might like Turok 2, Seeds of Evil. Yeah, makes sense. They break down scores into categories like visuals, sounds, mastery, and lifespan, and then give an overall verdict. For example, Mickey Mouse, 64 inches, got a 9 for visuals, 8 for sounds and mastery, 7 for lifespan, and overall verdict of 90%. Amazing Mario beating Mickey Mouseathon they call it. Bit much, in it? Or, then there's how they score games in general, like 85% and above gets a star game badge, meaning it's top notch. 84% to 70% is still good, fantastic, perfect, and well worth adding to your collection. 69% to 50% is just perfectly playable, but nothing special. And anything below 49% down to 0 is the disaster zone. Absolute, wretched crud. Harsh but fair, I suppose. Null. Finally, there's Team 64, with photos of the reviewers all pulling these weird staring faces, calling it their worrying stare. Bit strange. Tim Weaver reviewed Jet Force Gemini, saying his stare will be even more effective. Will Overton reviewed Ogre Battle 3, apparently it wasn't Jet Force, but dancing hamsters at Space World. Andrea Ball also reviewed Jet Force Gemini. Then there's Justin Webb, Jez Bickham, Martin Kitts who did Mario Golf, Mark Green, Paul Edwards also doing Mario Golf, and Neil Pedo back to Jet Force Gemini again. Seems like Jet Force Gemini and Mario Golf are the big games this month. F-Cup Maniacs gets a mention too by Jez Bickham, never heard of that one. So yeah, that's the review page, in a nutshell. The next page in N64 Magazine is all about Jet Force Gemini, which was a big deal at the time, Rare's first game since Banjo-Kazooie, can you believe it? It goes on about the cheat system, saying it's like GoldenEye where you have to earn your bonuses, none of this easy stuff. Apparently you collect ant and bear heads, which sounds a bit bonkers doesn't it, but very rare, that. They mention you can get cheat codes by button sequences too, for those of us who aren't quite up to scratch. There are a few screenshots, one with some blue robots that look like they're up to no good near some gates on this place called Ikore, and another of some sort of machine gun for blasting bugs, which is apparently Lupus's weapon of choice. They're making a point about the scale of the game, saying it's GOBS macking. Bit strong maybe, but it does look pretty big in the pictures. There's a funny one of Vela, who seems to have accidentally shot a bear friend. Typical. Down the side, in the info burst bit, it gives you the facts. Rare are the developers, of course. It's a 256 megabit cart, which was decent size back then. 1 to 4 players. Standard stuff. Controller pack, cartridge save, rumble pack all ticked, expansion pack and GB pack crossed, so no frills there. Release dates are mentioned as October 11th for the US, October 29th for us Brits, and TBA for Japan. And it's gonna cost £40, ouch, that's a fair whack for a game back then. But then again, it is rare. They're hyping it up as a bug-splattering super game, we'll see about that, eh? This page from N64 Magazine looks like it's giving us a rundown of the weapons in Jet Force Gemini Arena. Right at the top is banging on about choosing your ammo. Apparently if you pick up an enemy weapon you might just get bog-standard pistol ammo even if you're loaded already. They reckon you can trick the game into giving you something better like plasma shotgun ammo if you switch to the weapon you want to fill up before grabbing the new gun. Sneaky. Ain't gubbivars. Then they're talking about the power team. When you get all 3 characters, Juno, Vela and Lupus, powered up by the tribals, they each get a bit of an upgrade. Vela gets a jetpack, which is alright I suppose, and Lupus becomes a tank, which sounds a bit more useful. Poor old Floyd doesn't get powered up according to them. Bit of a shame that. There are a couple of screenshots showing Lupus in his tank, and Juno looking all cyberpunk bikerish. Warrington Melville. Below that, it's all about file access. Hardware. And it says there are 8 weapons in total to find on top of the standard pistol. They reckon that's enough to wipe the grin off Mizer's face. Then we get a rundown of 4 of them: the shocker, machine gun, plasma shotgun and tri-rocket launcher. The shocker is located in the spawn ship. It's a short-range electro-stun weapon, apparently good for paralysis. They reckon it's a last resort weapon though. The machine gun is in Goldwood, a rapid-fire multi-barrel thing, good against all targets, especially airborne units, and they say to save ammo for bigger targets. The plasma shotgun, also in Goldwood, is good for quick single shots, and is reliable against lone enemies, and they suggest it's a backup for the machine gun, which makes sense. Lastly, the tri-rocket launcher from Torfret is the most powerful weapon, and they're telling you to keep it away from the bears, whatever that means. Probably something daft in the game. Each weapon has a little screenshot of it in action as well. Yep, that's the weapons page. Pretty standard stuff really for a shooter back then. This page in N64 Magazine back in November '99 is having a look at Jet Force Gemini, specifically a section called A Tribal Quest. It's got that weird-looking bear-like creature front and center, one of the tribals I suppose, and one of the main characters, Juno, looking all heroic in the blue glow. It's chatting about how you might have spent the early part of the game shooting these tribals, but turns out you're meant to be saving them from the evil Mizar. Bit of a twist, eh? Apparently if you want to finish the game properly you've got to rescue all these furry blighters. They reckon a sparkle effect lets you know you've done a good job saving them. They're banging on about the graphics too, saying how good the in-game stuff is, and that there are plenty of cutscenes throughout the game to keep you interested in the story. Then it moves on to weapons. There's a rundown of 4 of them. The sniper rifle, found in Goldwood, which is a bit obvious what that does, vaporizing enemies with accuracy. Next up, the homing missile from ruthless, good for multiple enemies apparently, but watch out for targeting friendlies. Then the cluster bombs from SS Anubis, for clearing out whole platoons of bad guys. Wholesale destruction is the phrase they use. Bit much, isn't it? And finally, the shuriken, also from Goldwood, which is a heat-seeking blade for smaller drones, and you can reuse them, which is handy. Gotta pick them up though. Each weapon bit also has orders on how to use them in the game, like using the C buttons to dodge when using the sniper rifle, and cancelling locks on targets with the homing missile if they go red, and just general advice like using cluster bombs to clear out platoons and recovering your shurikens. It's all pretty standard stuff really, just a heads up on some of the weapons you'll be using in Jet Force Gemini, and a reminder to save those tribals. This page in N64 Mag issue 34 is all about Jet Force Gemini, remember that one? It's doing a bit of a deep dive into some aspects of the game. At the top it's talking about a boss battle, CANNINE bug baiting, which sounds a bit daft but par for the course back then. They're giving some tips on how to tackle these giant bug bosses. Looks like there are a couple of them, armed with missiles and lasers no less. The magazine is suggesting moving left and right, classic stuff for avoiding incoming fire, a bit like Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as the young'uns call it now. Apparently you need to hit the vulnerable bits after they flash white, and the machine gun is the weapon of choice. If you run out of ammo, apparently poor old Lupus gets it in the neck. Dramatic stuff. Then there's a bit about target practice, which is all about avoiding shooting your mates. Friendly fire incidents, they call it, because the game's got automatic enemy identification to stop you blasting your own team, which was handy. They talk about hunting enemies, and apparently you can collect their heads a bit gruesome, even for back then. They make a tinkling noise like Mario coins apparently. That's a bit of a weird comparison in it. You can even get heads off the tribals if you don't rescue them. Cheeky. There's a section on night vision, because each character has to go through Mizar's fortress in their own way. Juno's in lava, Vela's underwater, and Lupus gets night vision goggles for dark corridors. Apparently it gets all grainy, which is supposed to be cool. And if you shoot an ant drone in the dark, the tunnels light up, a neat little detail. Also there's a diamond geyser bit, which is basically a shop where you can get ammo and health for Mizar tokens. Tokens regenerate when you re-enter an area, so no need to be too stingy, they say. And a head count section, which is a bit of a laugh. Enemies lose their heads quite easily in this game apparently. They make a joke about cranial displacement, which is a bit posh for N64 Mag. You can collect the heads, which is a bit morbid, but hey, it's a shooter, innit? Looks like a fun game, bit violent mind you. This page of N64 Magazine from November '99 is all about Jet Force Gemini, focusing on getting the most out of Rare's shooter. First up, there's a bit about Mint Floyd, which is about the coupe mode. It says it's more of a father and son mode, rather than proper coupe, because one player controls Lupus as normal, and the second player just gets to be Floyd's gun sight with unlimited ammo. Sounds a bit like player 2 gets a raw deal, but they reckon it makes killing bosses easier, and is a laugh. Ace. Then there's Floyd pads. Apparently if you find these Floyd pads in the game, you get to play as Floyd in a timed section. They warn you to read the mission briefing carefully, because there might be secondary objectives to get bonus awards. It shows some screenshots of playing as Floyd in first person, flying through some rather organic looking tunnels. They even joke about finding DNA in some sort of alien sphincter. Charming. After that there's a section called Pretty Fly, which gives hovering hints for jetpack experts. It's got 4 numbered tips on how to fly efficiently. Tip 1 is about using each Floyd pad to get fuel for the next one. Tip 2 is about using short bursts for hovering and switching off jets to drop down levels, and using bursts to slow down before landing. Tip 3 advises not to bother shooting when airborne because it's too difficult to aim, better to land and shoot. Finally, tip 4 is about when fuel is low, get as high as possible to drift to your destination safely. Solid advice that is. Key. Lastly there's Loaded for Bear, which is about funny ways to splat enemies, calling them Ewok splattering moments. They've got 4 examples. Bit of dark humor there for a Nintendo game, eh? The JFK is about sniping giant drones. The Nuclear Family is about blowing up groups of tribals with cluster bombs. The Tease and Pop is about making the cute ones follow you then blowing them up. And the Jackie Chan is about lining up 2-headed enemies for a single shuriken kill. They've even given them amusing names, quite cheeky for N64 Mag. It ends with a go, go, and a little N64 logo with a page number 55. Standard magazine fare, back then. The next page of the magazine dives into Jet Force Gemini, and it's all about the multiplayer mayhem, which back then we were always keen for. They start by mentioning the save system, 6 slots no less, which seemed a bit overkill at the time, but they reckon it's handy if you're sharing your cart, which was often the case, wasn't it? Beer. Then it's into the battle mode, standard deathmatch fare, but with the usual rare polish. They say there are loads of characters to unlock, which is always a good incentive. They do moan about the split screen making the controls a bit awkward, and yeah, that quartered screen could get a bit confusing when things got hectic. But they liked the Rift ESA level, reckon it's a decent arena. There's a bit about finding hidden totems in the multiplayer games to unlock extra features, so typical Rare secret hunting. They suggest rummaging around in the dark corners, which sounds about right for them. Ia, 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 ia. Ia, 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 oh, ia, al, ia, 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 oh, ia, ia, oh, ia, 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 oh, yak with ants. Apparently you have to be careful with your ammo, and it's for up to 4 players, keeping track of your shots. They touch on the enemy AI, saying it's surprisingly clever, even cowardly, especially those blue ants. And the yellow ones might even surrender, which is a bit of a laugh. They mention bonus racing games in multiplayer, which is a nice extra, even if the controls are basic, and they compare it to Mario Kart but not quite in the same league naturally. The overall verdict seems pretty positive, calling it a proper shoot 'em up, praising the fast pace and smart enemies. They talk about spending ages playing it, and exploring to find all the secrets. They mention ground and air enemies, and how those drone enemies can be a real pain. because they're actually quite smart. All in all, it sounds like they reckon it's a game that'll keep you busy for a good while. This page from N64 Magazine is all about Jet Force Gemini. Looks like a pretty glowing review. They've slapped a massive 93% on it, so they must be chuffed. Right at the top, it's got pluses and minuses. The good stuff is best graphics around, old school gameplay, huge levels, great sub-games and a warped sense of humor. The minuses are tough for beginners and lukewarm multiplayer, which is a bit of a downer on the multiplayer front. Wasn't always a strong point on the N64, was it? There's a section saying, if you like this, and it points you towards Body Harvest, saying it's an epic bug hunting quest. Right, remember that one getting hyped up as well, DMA Design, those Grand Theft Auto lads, weren't they? There are screenshots dotted about with little captions. One says, a couple more bullets, and we'll have that head off nicely, showing some cartoony action. Another one with Vela coming out of the water, and then one about tricky platforming bits where Lupus has the advantage. And down at the bottom there's one saying, giant bugs frozen in blocks of ice, with Mizar lurking about. Sounds like classic Rare humor, bit quirky and over the top. The review itself goes on about the visuals being amazing, real-time reflections, shadows, and a swimming pool of liquid bug juice, whatever that is. They're proper raving about the graphics, saying it wipes the floor with every other N64 game so far. Bold words. Sounds are also a 9 out of 10, saying intense Dolby surround. Mastery and lifespan also get good scores, with detailed environments and impressively big and secret-packed levels. The verdict bit at the end is all about old-school value of playability, and thanking Rare for still caring about gameplay. So yeah, overall it sounds like they're well impressed with Jet Force Gemini. Another Rare belter. They were on a roll back then, weren't they? This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's all about Mario Golf. Seems like they were quite keen on it back then. Iki. Previously in N64 bit at the top, mentions that playing tournament mode is the way to unlock courses, and apparently you could play through about 29 virtual tournaments. Blimey, that's a lot of tournaments for a handheld game. Warrington. Looking at the screenshots, they're showcasing some of the game's little moments. There's one where Koopa is struggling with the wind, saying the green is tiny. Another shows Blue Yoshi getting a bit handy with Wario's neck using a 3-wood bit of temper there. Apparently blind shots are nerve-wracking, but Mario can handle it. Then there's talk about Bowser nearly getting a hole-in-one, and someone winning a bet with a massive drive. And get this, Princess Toadstool has her own rules for scoring. Clearly. Sounds typically bonkers Nintendo, doesn't it? They even mention Wadza hitting a shot that crackles with lightning. Bit tasty indeed. And putting practice in Peach's back garden crazy golf course. Sounds like a right laugh actually. The info burst section gives you the nitty-gritty. Nintendo game 128 megabits cart, up to 4 players, controller pack pages are crossed out, bit of an oops there from the mag. Cart save and password save are ticked, which was standard for the time. Rumble pack and GB pack are also ticked, but expansion pack is crossed out, so no need for that fancy RAM upgrade. It was out in the US and Japan already, but we had to wait till October in the UK. And 40 quid, it would set you back. Not cheap, but you know, N64 games weren't, were they? The main text goes on about Mario's many talents. Bit of a jack of all trades, isn't he? Saving princesses and all that. They reviewed the Japanese version in issue 31, and this English version apparently shows there's even more golfing to it. They reckon the leaderboard is like a Nintendo Who's Who, listing characters like Chain Chomp, Hammer Bros, Melon, Talon, Darunia, Pigma, Cheep Cheep, Navi and Saria. Bit of a shame you can't actually play as them though, just names on a list. They even cheekily compare the game to the likes of Davis Love and Tiger Woods. Bit of a stretch, lads. Apparently the Japanese version was a hit in the office at lunchtime. Well, it's Mario Golf, isn't it? Bound to be a bit of fun, even if it's not gonna turn you into Nick Faldo overnight. The next page in the mag is about Mario Golf on the N64, and it's titled, Challenge. It's all about this club slots mode, which sounds a bit of a laugh. Basically, the game picks your clubs for you with a slot machine, so you could end up with some right rubbish clubs and have to try and play a proper round. It says it's a good equalizer, so if you're a proper Mario Golf whiz, this'll test you. Then there's a bit about watch the birdies and getting birdie badges. Seems like they're encouraging you to play well and get birdies to unlock stuff. Apparently if you get 50 birdie badges, you unlock Maple, who is supposed to be a top player with a good drive. They've got a bit about data showing your stats and get about unlocking Maple. Lastly, there's a bit about the transfer pack. Remember that thing? It's mentioned that Mario Golf is one of the only N64 games to use it with the Game Boy Color version. Apparently you can share data and characters between the N64 and Game Boy games. The handheld version is meant to be a bit more RPG-like, and you can boost your character's abilities in both games by swapping points around. They reckon there are extra character slots at the bottom of the character select screen for golfers you've uploaded from the Game Boy game. It's all a bit of a gimmick really, but I suppose back then it was quite a novelty to link up your handheld with your console. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 34 if I remember right, is all about Mario Golf on the N64. It's got this feature called Course of Doom, which sounds a bit dramatic for a golf game, doesn't it? Anyway, it looks at different holes in the game and gives you tips on how to play them. There's Course 5, a par 4, Course 3, a par 5, Course 4, a par 3 and another Course 4 hole, also a par 3. They're all on Yoshi's Island. How to tee. They talk about characters like Mario, Peach and Donkey Kong, and mention getting Metal Mario, which sounds like a cool unlockable if you can get all 108 birdie badges. Blimey, good luck with that. Apparently, there's a trick to saving and retrying each hole until you get a birdie though. Cheeky. Then there's something called Monkey Boy, about unlocking Donkey Kong by doing these tough ring shot challenges. 30 stars gets you Donkey Kong, apparently, the 302-yard terror of the fairways. Sounds a bit much for a golf game, but hey, it's Mario Golf. The reviewer reckons the Japanese version was a bit obscure, but the PL version, that's us, is in plain English thankfully. They seem to think it's a good game, calling it a genuine sporting classic because of the delicious uncertainty of each hole. They say even novice players can get a lucky birdie and beat the experts, thanks to the handicapping system. Apparently the difficulty is harder than the Japanese version too, so we're getting the proper challenge then. This page in N64 Magazine back in '99 is having a look at Mario Golf. Seems like a pretty glowing review overall. They've slapped a 90% and a Star Game award on it, so it must be alright then. They're going through a few of the courses. Course 6 hole 18 is a tricky one apparently, using Mario and Luigi's faces as landmarks. Typical Nintendo humor that. Course 1 hole 16 warns you about balls rolling back down hills. Sounds frustrating. Course 2 hole 3 is described as easy to par, but you can go for an eagle if you've unlocked the power characters. Showing off already. Course 6 hole 16. Peach's earring is the green. Sounds a bit bonkers, but visually interesting I suppose. There's a bit about the Devil's Course being tough, and Course 6 hole 14 with chain chomps involved. Sounds like they're throwing everything at you later on. The pluses and minuses box lists the good points as great graphics, varied courses, cool speech, remember that? Loads of competitions, and Game Boy compatible, which was a thing then, wasn't it? The minuses bit just says, it's very golfy. A bit of a non-complaint really. If you like this, section points to Mario Kart 64, naturally, calling it the best multiplayer game ever. A bit strong perhaps, but it was definitely a classic. They reckon Mario Golf is the best golf game you can buy, and Matza's finest outing since he got out of his cart. Cheeky. Down the side, they've rated it on visuals, sounds, mastery, and lifespan, giving them all 9s. So yeah, it's a pretty positive write-up for Mario Golf. Looks like they were quite taken with it at the time. This page is a review of InFisherman Bass Hunter 64, right? Blimey, fishing games on the N64, who'd have thought it? Apparently, this reviewer, Jess Bickham, was pleasantly surprised. He thought fishing games were a bit daft, like Golf or Vanessa Feltz, but reckons this one is alright. Not as good as Shadowman, Quake 2, or Zelda mind you, but a decent enough fishing sim for its time. They reckon it's complex and deep, with nice fish and good boat action, which are the pluses. But on the minuses side, it's apparently a bit complicated and tedious after a while, which sounds about right for a fishing game, doesn't it? They even compare it to the fishing bit in Zelda, Ocarina of Time, saying that was brilliant, and this is in a similar vein but a whole game of it. Looking at the ratings, it's all 6s out of 10 for visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan. Pretty average then, eh? The verdict is a fine, if unexciting, attempt at a proper fishing game on the N64, and it gets a 67%. Fair enough, I suppose. The info burst box says it's a 96 megabit cart, one player, needs a controller pack but not the expansion or GB pack. Rumble pack is in though, naturally. It was out now in the US, October in the UK, and TBA for Japan, costing £40. 40 quid for a fishing game back then. Core games were pricey. They mentioned different techniques, the fish finder, line tension, all that jazz, and loads of lures and baits, like the Arbogast Jitterbug and Snagproof Moss Mouse. Sounds very authentic, if a bit niche. Overall it sounds like it's alright if you're really into fishing, a proper comprehensive fishing package. But for the rest of us, they suggest sticking with the fishing in Zelda or messing about in the Hyrule Loach, which is probably more fun to be honest. This page is a review of Magical Tetris Challenge on the N64, from issue 34 of N64 Magazine, back in '99. Right away you can see it's not exactly glowing. They've given it a measly 51%, which speaks volumes, doesn't it? Pah. The headline screams, magical? Pah! Schmagical more like, which pretty much sets the tone. It seems Jess Bickham, the reviewer, isn't too impressed. He's saying it's Tetris, but with Disney characters shoehorned in. Mickey and the gang like Goofy, Donald, Minnie and even P apparently. They reckon it's a bit of a cynical cash-in, which, let's be honest, Disney games sometimes were. The pluses and minuses bit highlights that it is Tetris, and there are Disney characters as a plus. But the minuses are ridiculous block shapes and that it's not very good Tetris at all. Ouch. They're saying if you like this sort of thing, you might be better off with the new Tetris on the N64, which they apparently rated really highly at 88% in issue 33. Apparently that was the best non-Game Boy Tetris they'd ever played. Bit of a contrast, eh? The review goes on about how Capcom, who made it, have tried to ruin Tetris with these weird block shapes, especially these massive 5x5 blocks, which sound like a right pain. It's all about trying to mess with your opponent, but it just sounds a bit gimmicky. They even mention an up-down Tetris option, which is intriguing if you're desperate to change things up. It's, well, okay, if you ignore the fun-destroying shapes. Otherwise than that, it's bog-standard Tetris. So not exactly a ringing endorsement. They reckon it's an occasional treat, at best, but there are far better Tetris games out there. In the info burst box, it mentions it's from Capcom/Activision on a 64 megabit cart, supports 1 or 2 players, controller and memory packs, and it's out now for £40. There's a bit saying, "I'm so Disney," where they moan that Disney isn't even in the game's title, despite it being full of Disney characters. They show screenshots of the game, one with Mickey and Goofy chatting, and another with a character select screen, showing Mickey, Donald, Goofy and Minnie. Overall, it sounds like they were really disappointed with Magical Tetris Challenge. They clearly felt it was a lazy attempt to cash in on the Disney name and didn't really add anything good to the classic Tetris formula, and possibly made it worse with daft block shapes. 51% pretty damning for a Tetris game, really. Definitely not one I rushed out to buy back in the day, and probably rightly so if this review is anything to go by. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at F-Cup Maniacs, which they're also calling Fighters Destiny 2. Sounds a bit dodgy, that name, doesn't it? It's all about this fighting school training mode, where you can apparently learn moves off of a sinister samurai geezer. They reckon it's a bit like Fighters Destiny, which they reviewed ages ago, and gave a decent score to, if I remember right. There's a bit about the characters, mentioning D-Dog, who's in a natty check suit and has yellow hair, and mailing. They're also on about Ushi, that cow character from the first Fighters Destiny. He's back, but now they're calling him Moo. Says he still drinks milk from a jug, which is a bit weird, innit? GG. The screenshots show the game in action and the training mode setup. They're pointing out the point scoring system and making fun of D-Dog's fluorescent socks. The info burst box tells you the techie bits: 96 megabit cart, 1 or 2 players, saves on the controller pack, no rumble or expansion pack support, none of that. It's out in Japan now, and if you were importing it, it'd cost you about 35 quid. No UK release date yet. Typical. Looks like another import job for the hardcore fighter fans then. This page is a review of F-Cup Maniacs, or as we knew it, Fighters Destiny 2, back in November '99. Seems like Infogrames didn't make much of a song and dance about publishing it, did they? But the mags were giving it decent scores, and it was doing alright sales-wise. Apparently, F-Cup stands for Fighting Cup. Who knew? They're banging on about this new Sugoroku mode, which sounds a bit like a board game mixed with fighting. You roll dice to move about and then scrap if you land on the wrong square. There are Joker characters like Cherry, who mess with your dice rolls, and Master Squares where you fight a tough opponent. Sounds a bit convoluted, to be honest, but they seem to think it adds something to the single player. They are highlighting how it's still got that unique point system from the first Fighters Destiny, where it's not just about knocking someone out, you've got to be tactical with throws and ring outs and all that malarkey. Apparently it stops it being just a leg sweep spam fest, which, yeah, fair enough, some fighters were a bit like that. Warrant. Graphically they reckon it's a bit better looking than the original, and the special effects are decent enough. Sound is just the same tunes as Fighters Destiny, which were alright, nothing to write home about. They reckon it's a solid beat 'em up, and the single player mode will keep you busy. In the pluses and minuses box, they're saying the good bits are the point system, simple controls but with depth, and that it's fast and fluid. On the downside, it was a Japanese import, so UK release was up in the air, and it wasn't massively different from the first game. Hardly surprising really, sequels rarely were back then. They've got a little if you like this bit, recommending Smash Bros on the N64, giving it a 90% score. Says it's a brilliant scrapper with all your favourite Nintendo characters, and it was out in December for us, PAL chaps. Smash Bros, yeah, that was a bit special, wasn't it? A proper laugh with mates. Accessibility-wise, they say the Sugoroku rules are in Japanese, but you'll pick it up quickly enough. Visuals are clean and colorful, and sounds are the same as Fighter's Destiny. Mastery is a fabulously constructed beat-em-up, and lifespan is the tweaked one-player mode will keep you going. Solid 7s and 8s there, pretty decent overall. Verdict at the bottom, they say it might be very similar to the original, but it's still a great game and they want a PAL release ASAP. Gave it an 85%, which is a pretty good score in their book. Yeah, Fighter's Destiny 2, or F-Cup Maniacs, whatever you want to call it, it was alright. Probably worth a punt if you liked the first one. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 34, it's the import arena section, isn't it? Looks like they're having a butchers at Neon Genesis Evangelion on the N64. Right then, Evangelion, that moody giant robot anime that was all the rage back then. Warrington, they've got your typical pluses and minuses box, saying it's Evangelion so fans will lap it up, and it's got neat graphics and plenty of cutscenes. On the downside, apparently, there's no real gameplay to speak of, at all. Charming. There's a bit called Shoot 'Em Up, about a simulation mode, which sounds like a basic shooting gallery, where you blast robots that just pop up. You can even shoot the buildings apparently. Very odd indeed, they say, which I reckon sums it up. If you're into this sort of thing, they recommend Last Legion UX on the SNES, calling it a mildly entertaining Japonly giant robot battle game. Accessibility-wise, it's all in Japanese obviously, but they reckon if you're a proper fan of Evangelion you'll probably figure it out. Visually it's praised for looking like the series, even in the cutscenes, and the sounds are apparently over the top with classical music. Mastery gets a low score, saying it's just a story linked by some basic fighting, and lifespan isn't much either, just seeing the story to the end. The verdict is a bit of a kicker, scoring it 61%. In its own way, NGE is fascinating stuff, but it's not really much of a game at all. Rent the videos instead. Ouch! Below that there's an info burst giving the game details. Neon Genesis Evangelion from Bandai, on a 64 megabits cart, 1 player, controller pack, cartridge save, and rumble pack compatible. GB pack is a no-go, and it's out now in Japan, with US and UK dates to be announced. Cost is about 35 quid. Bit pricey for renting videos instead, innit? The next page showcases Ogre Battle 64, or Ogre Battle 3 Feet as they're calling it in the info burst section, from Quest. It seems like they're pretty hyped about it, calling it potentially one of the best RPGs. It's an import from Japan, naturally, as most of the good stuff was back then. Feetin. They're talking about the battle intervention gauge, which sounds like a fancy way of saying you can't run away from fights until it's full, and you need it full to cast the really good magic spells. Bit of a gimmick, maybe? Visually, it's isometric, a bit like those old SNES titles, but probably a bit prettier. The screenshots show some strategic map stuff, and then zoomed-in battles in 2D when the fights actually happen. They mention you control 7 units and you're capturing enemy strongholds, so it sounds like a strategy RPG hybrid, which was always a bit of a niche thing. They're saying the battles are a treat for the eyes, with sparkly effects, which is probably magazine talk for it's alright. The reviewer seems a bit conflicted, saying it's possibly one of the best RPGs, but then questioning, or is it? Classic Magazine hedging their bets, innit? They mention long conversations and tactical combat, the usual RPG fare. It was supposed to be out in Japan already, and coming to the UK in spring, probably meaning we'd be waiting ages for it, costing 6,800 yen, or about 35 quid, which was a fair whack for an import back then. This page is all about Ogre Battle 3, or they think it's all Ogre, as they've headlined it. Bit of a pun there, I suppose. It's reviewing this import game, looks like a strategy thing. They're saying you need a brain to play it, which is probably fair enough for these types of games. Warrington. Looking at the screenshots, it's got that isometric view, a bit like those old strategy RPGs, you know the sort. Apparently you can only have 5 members in your fighting unit, and some of the bigger characters like the two-headed wolf take up more space, so that's something to consider. Positioning your characters matters too, like putting a Valkyrie at the back for a lightning attack. Items are in there, food and armor, even fancy metal bras for the ladies apparently, cheeky. Movement is point and click on the world map, sounds simple enough. They're saying mastery is all about the speed, or lack of it. Arrows and fireballs are exchanged slowly, giving you time to think. Good for some, maybe boring for others. Unit management is apparently easy to get your head around, which is good because these games can get a bit menu heavy. Could for some. Looking at the pluses and minuses box, they're saying the good bits are the backgrounds, loads of missions, unit management, and it's satisfyingly challenging. Downsides are unit movement is slow, and it can get confusing sometimes. If you liked Holy Magic Century on the N64, they reckon you might like this. Remember that Konami game? Got a 71% in the mag back then. Accessibility-wise, they're straight up saying the story is impenetrable, so don't go in expecting to understand much of what's going on. Visuals are described as spangly effects and lush 2D backdrops, but otherwise a little basic, which sounds about right for the time. Sounds are epic and booming, which is always welcome. Mastery is compared to the old SNES version, so if you played that you'll know what to expect. Lifespan is long, loads of missions, so it'll keep you busy. Verdict is 82%, they call it more of a real-time strategy game than an RPG, and complex and involving. Sounds like one for the hardcore strategy fans then, if you can get your hands on an import copy. This page from Club 64 Right, part of the N64 Magazine back in '99. Simpler times. It's their monthly guide to what's inside. Looks like the main feature this month is World Driver Championship. Remember that? Bit of a looker at the time. For the N64, they're banging on about perfecting your driving skills to win a fab new wheel. Very 90s. Then you've got the usual sections. Club 64 mailbox. That's where folks would write in, probably moaning about cheat codes not working or something. How-to section is teaching you to play like Michael Owen in World League Soccer 2000. Michael Owen. Wonder what happened to him. Tips extra is just general gaming tips, no doubt. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic. Remember him? Supposed to be the expert, telling you how to get better at games. Probably just stating the obvious, really. Nintendo Hotline is promising Quake 2 secrets. Quake 2 on the N64, bit of a technical marvel really, even if it was a bit toned down from the PC version. Game On is another set of tricky challenges. Those were always a bit of alright to waste a bit of time. I'm the best leaderboards for games, always good for bragging rights down the school. Skill Club 64 Platinum sounds like some sort of high score table, or Elite Club for gamers. Contact is for buying, selling and swapping games, like a pre-internet eBay for your mates basically. Directory check before you buy, maybe price guides or something, and then back issues and subscriptions if you wanted to get your hands on more of this golden content. There's even a little picture of the front of the magazine. You can see games like Shadowman and Quake 2 mentioned on the cover. November 1999 it was. Feels like a lifetime ago. The next page is the mailbox section from Club 64. It kicks off with a star letter titled The Business, where a reader's having a bit of a moan about the magazine being naive about the Dreamcast. They reckon it's got some decent launch titles, even if one of them does star that blue hedgehog. They even have a dig at the Saturn. This fella reckons Sega Rally 2 and Sonic Adventure looked the business at his local cinema. He's raving about the graphics and speed, comparing Sega Rally 2 to V-Rally 2 and Top Gear. Bit much, mate, calm down. Warranted. Then there's a correction corner, which is always good for a chuckle. Someone's pulled them up on saying Psyduck was peaceful with his eyes shut in the Pocket Monsters Stadium review, when any Pokemon trainer knows he's holding his head because of headaches. Another reader is having a go about a Worms Armageddon preview, saying Nintendo never had a version of Worms, forgetting the original Game Boy one, bless him. And someone else is correcting them on the DG Plus freebie they mentioned for Castlevania and PM64 in issue 32. Apparently it was issue 31, pedantic aren't we? There are a few more little corrections about Rogue Squadron, Duke Nukem, 0 Hour and Perfect Dark, and Smash Bros being out in America and the UK. Someone named Andrea is getting the blame for a few errors. Poor Andrea. Warrington also has Melly. There's a letter called Right On to It, where a reader is wondering what's going to happen to N64 Magazine when the next generation console comes out, calling it Dolphin. Bit early to be panicking about that in '99, weren't we? They're worried about them having to change the name and disappearing. The magazine's reply is reassuring enough, saying they're not going anywhere and we might see Dolphin stuff hitting the shelves eventually. Obvious really. Thus proving is another letter about watching Bits on Channel 4 and seeing Guy Miller from Acclaim talking about Shadowman. Apparently he gave Rare a hypnotic stare. Righto. The letter writer reckons it proves their choice of developers is good. Whatever you say, mate. Lastly, there's a little bit called Flicking Through, where someone found some old N64 magazines, issue 18 apparently, and found some outstanding news. Intriguing, but they don't say what it is, leaving us hanging. Typical magazine tactic to keep you reading next month. This page of N64 Magazine is looking at the mailbag, Club 64 Mailbox it's called. Someone's been interviewing the DMA design folks about Body Harvest and asking if there was anything else they'd have liked to put in the game, and DMA said extra levels like Hawaii, Antarctica, or underwater Japan. The writer reckons a sequel for the Dolphin, which was the code name for the GameCube back then, would be brilliant. Then there's a bit about some pictures. Someone was flipping through an old SNES magazine when they saw an article about the N64 Ultra 64, which was the console's original name. They reckon Dolphin might go through a few more name changes before it actually comes out. The Right Notes is a funny story about a couple of lads on holiday who were messing around in Mad Monster Mansion in Banjo-Kazooie. They figured out the music from the organ in the church and wrote it all down. Turns out Motsand in the game was actually playing the right notes in the music book, so fair play to Rare for that detail. Our Little Friend talks about Super Smash Bros. And why it hadn't come out in Europe yet. This reader reckons it's because Pikachu, our little friend, hadn't made it to UK shores yet. And the magazine editor agrees, saying now Pokemon has a release date in October, Smash Bros. Is coming in December, just in time for Christmas. Makes sense, I suppose. Pikachu was everywhere back then. Or ease. There's a bit about Body Harvest being cheap now, only £20, or even a tenner if you find it cheap, because it didn't sell that well even though it was good apparently. Down at the bottom is Dream On, which is a reader idea for a game. This fella Douglas Scott from London has had a brainwave for a music management sim, where you organise and run a hit TV show, booking acts and all that. You get ratings, budgets, and if you do well you get more money, but if you do badly, the pop stars might refuse to come on the show, and you might get the sack. Sounds a bit dull if you ask me. A bit like a spreadsheet game really. The editor jokes about having Gail Porter presenting and Britney Spears singing, saying it'll be more exciting than a 747 simulator. Cheeky. Finally there's Austin Powers 64, another reader idea from Adam Mackenzie in Windsor. He wants an Austin Powers game, where Austin has to save the world from Dr. Evil. He reckons it should be like GoldenEye but funny, with loads of speech and multiplayer with Dr. Evil, Mini-Me, Fat Bastard and all those characters, judo chopping each other to death. The editor says it spoofs James Bond films, and using the GoldenEye engine would be ironic. Yeah, I can see that. Austin Powers was pretty popular around then. This page is from the letters section of the magazine. They've called it bonus letters for some reason. Maybe they were running out of page names. Someone called Bob from Glasgow is on about big feet and shoes, and there's a funny comment about Mark and big feet. Typical banter. Someone else is on about being a hippie and driving a Volkswagen. A bit random, alright. Gekapul. Then there's David Roberts from Bromley, threatening to expose a government conspiracy if his letter isn't printed, and Ed the editor plays along, saying well we didn't, so I guess we must be. That's a bit of alright. Owen from Scotland is claiming he can juggle tarpaulins, whittle lemon cakes and cushions all at once. What a show-off. Right, says Ed, classic. Matthew Harris is wondering if the letters are fake, because his dad thinks so, and Ed just prints it to prove him wrong. Job done. John Kendall has some game ideas, Smash Mothers and Snowboard Aphids. Blimey, sounds terrible, but Ed just says interesting. John Roy is saying, Mr. Overton and Mr. Kitts should be ashamed, and Ed's all, they do things to be ashamed of every day. Owen Matthews is banging on about remembering Rare, and Ed just says good point. Edgar Wallace says, Millennium Hand and Shrimp, whatever that means. And finally, the Muffin Monster is complaining about being poor and insuperior, and Ed replies, oh, alright then. Very helpful, Ed. Next up is a section called Vague References, about Duke Nukem, 0 Hour. Oliver Hall from Stoke-on-Trent is asking about release dates, reckons the review was good, but the dates are all over the place. Apparently they were trying to add new textures to the game, which delayed it and messed with release dates. They were aiming for September, which was optimistic, and it sounds like even the American version release was vague. Then there's a decent controller. Someone's writing in about the PC controller debate from the last issue. This bloke reckons PC is the ultimate gaming console because of better control, graphics, sound and games, and says the PlayStation Pad is better than the N64 controller. Fair enough, the PlayStation Pad was pretty good, but for N64 games, the N64 controller was designed for it, wasn't it? Pite. Lastly, there's a So Tell Me This Q&A section. First question is about that little globe-headed bloke mascot they use, called Worldy Bloke, turns out. Sounds a bit daft. Then someone's asking about Grand Theft Auto on the N64, and what the Game Boy Pack does. Apparently no GTA on N64, unsurprisingly. The Game Boy Pack is a memory thingy that goes into the N64 controller, and lets you download data from your Game Boy, like Pokemon for Stadium, and for Creator Player in Perfect Dark with the Game Boy camera. Sounds a bit fiddly, but alright. Jens Jesko. Then there's a question about WWF games since THQ are doing them now. No real answer, just vague wrestling stuff coming. Donkey Kong expansion pack is coming, yeah, definitely needed for that game, and it'll cost the same as Zelda, about 50 quid. Ouch. Any more Star Wars games coming? Yes, definitely. More material, whatever that means. Ogre Battle 3 in America? Rumor has it they're taking on the Extreme Wrestling license, hyper-violent barbed wire fighting, lovely. And finally, where's Mother 3 then? Well, it's down for a pale release next year, but it's only 50% complete. Space World, which was probably some Japanese game show, only had it at 50%. So typical delays then. Send your questions to some address in Bath. Right then. This page is the Club 64 mailbox section, and it's done up like a corkboard, remember those? It's got readers' letters and drawings pinned all over it. Someone called Oliver Wright is kicking off about Turok games, and saying PC gaming is better than the N64. The magazine editor isn't having any of it and lists off a load of N64 classics like Mario, GoldenEye, Zelda, Pilotwings, Shadowman, Mario Kart, Banjo-Kazooie, and even mentions Jet Force Gemini, Donkey Kong 64 and Perfect Dark, trying to prove a point that the N64 had decent games. Then there's a funny one from Michael Carter about sweaty thumbs and how he uses earphone covers on the controller stick to stop his thumb slipping. Bit of a bodge job, but if it works, it works. Craig Ellis is complaining about a review calling a game very bad, mentioning Rogue Squadron, F1 WGP2 and Quake 2, saying newspapers don't know what they are on about when it comes to games. The board bit is showing off readers' artwork, lots of Zelda drawings, Ocarina of Time and just Zelda, and some Pokemon drawings like Squirtle and Chansey. There's also a Wario Golf drawing. Looks like readers are sending in their fan art. Quake 2 and F1 World Grand Prix screenshots are there too, likely to go with the review mentions in the letters. Bit of a mixed bag page this one, reader opinions and fan art. This page from N64 Magazine is the Mailbox Club 64 inches section, which is always a good read to see what other gamers are thinking. It's got readers' reviews and scores for a few games. First up, there's V-Rally 99. Andrew from Poole doesn't mince his words, calls it absolute bobbins, and only gives it a measly 64%. Sounds like he really didn't like it, complaining about the handling and comparing it badly to Top Gear Rally. Ouch. Next is Quake 2, which Sam from Leighton Buzzard scored a 78%. He thinks the single player is a bit of a drag, but reckons the multiplayer is excellent and could even be a GoldenEye beater. That's high praise back then, GoldenEye being the king of multiplayer on the N64. Killer. Then there's F1 World Grand Prix 2. James from Loughborough is seriously impressed, giving it a whopping 96%. He reckons it's loads better than the first game, the graphics are great, and thinks you should just skip the first game and get this one instead. Gorrington Nilkra, finally, WCW/NWO Revenge gets a massive 95% from Craig in Trowbridge. He thinks 75% would be underselling it. Says it's got loads of wrestlers, great moves, and is brilliant fun with mates, only second to GoldenEye again for multiplayer. Dustbins and stop signs as weapons, sounds like typical wrestling game silliness but fun. Looks like people are encouraged to send in their own reviews, 100 words or less with a percentage score, to the magazine address or email, and if you want to be famous, even a passport photo. Good old days of getting your name in print in a magazine. This page is all about getting good at World Driver Championship on the N64. It's a how-to guide, which is handy because, let's be honest, sometimes these racing games could be a bit tricky to master back in the day. The article starts by saying, World Driver Championship is one of the best driving games from the States, and they reckon it's more realistic than some of the other daft stuff around like San Francisco Rush and Beetle Adventure Racing, mentioning it's more like F1 World Grand Prix. They're giving out tips to improve your driving, things like not using too much curb or you'll end up flipping your car, which, yeah, we've all been there. They also talk about power sliding, saying you need to correct them, and steering against a skid to stop yourself sliding. Good advice actually. Tomacos. There are screenshots of the game showing the driving tips in action, like what happens when you power slide wrong and right. They also say qualifying is worth it to get a better starting position, and traditional jump starts won't help you in this game. Fair enough. Down the side there's a What We Said bit, where someone called Jess apparently rambled on about the game back in issue 32, and concluded it was one of the best racing games you'll ever play, and certainly the best on the N64. Bit strong, Jess, but alright. They gave it a score of 91%, which is pretty decent in anyone's book. Overall, it's a useful page if you were struggling with World Driver Championship and wanted to get a bit better at it. This page is all about getting the hang of power sliding in World Driver Championship on the N64. It's got a big article called Driven Round the Bend, explaining how to drift your way around corners to win races. Apparently power sliding is the only real trick you need to master to beat the game, which sounds a bit simplistic, doesn't it? But back then, getting your car sideways was pretty cool. They break down power sliding into 6 steps with pictures from the game, showing you how to line up your car, steer into the corner, control the slide by adjusting the steering, and then straighten out as you exit. They even talk about feathering the throttle. Fancy words for tapping the accelerator. It's all about rear-wheel drive cars and oversteer, which was pretty common in racing games at the time. There's also a bit about choosing your team in World Driver Championship. It says that winning cups unlocks offers from other teams, and that the better teams have better cars according to the stat screens. But the magazine suggests sticking with a team for a while to really learn how their cars handle before jumping to a new one. Makes sense. Swapping cars all the time probably wouldn't help you master power sliding, would it? All in all, it's a pretty straightforward guide to getting good at World Driver Championship. Good game that, spend a bit of time with it. This page is a bit of a how-to guide, classic N64 Mag stuff really. It's all about getting better at racing games, specifically in World Driver Championship it seems, that old PlayStation port. They're going over cornering techniques, calling it sharp bends and hairpins, and breaking it down into steps, a bit like a driving lesson in text form. Things like braking before corners, little steering flicks, and power sliding, all the usual arcade racer stuff. They even mention racing dirty, which is a bit cheeky, suggesting you use other cars as braking cushions, or nudge opponents off the track. Bit naughty really, but back then, if the game let you do it, it was fair game, wasn't it? No damage models in World Driver Championship apparently, so you could just bounce off the walls too, which, looking back, was probably a bit of a design flaw, wasn't it? They're showing screenshots of the game as well. It's alright looking for the time. A bit blurry now though. It's definitely aiming at giving you the edge in those fast-paced races, getting you around the track a bit quicker, and maybe even winning by any means necessary if that racing dirty bit is anything to go by. Standard tips and tricks page really, but useful if you were stuck on a particular corner back in the day. This page from N64 Magazine, bless it, is shouting at us about how to enter the World Driver Championship competition. It's all about showing off your skills in this driving game, World Driver Championship, which, if I remember right, was alright for its time, a bit Gran Turismo-ish on the N64, trying to be all serious and sim-like. They've picked 6 tracks out of the 10 in the game: Hawaii, Kyoto, Las Vegas, Rome, Lisbon and Black Forest, and they've given us target lap times to beat on each course. You have to race these tracks, get your best lap times, and then fill out this form at the bottom to send in. The prize is a Guillemot steering wheel, which back then would have been pretty decent kit, and the glory of being the N64 Magazine World Driver Champion. Runners-up just get to be mates with the winner, apparently. A whole slew of new I'm colleagues, as they put it. Bit weird that. Looking at the track descriptions, they're quite amusing. Hawaii is the easiest track, apparently, good for power slides. Kyoto is the Japanese home of Nintendo, tight and windy, use the crash barriers they say. Las Vegas is more fun on the streets, gambling capital, no Ford Mustang unfortunately, cheeky. Rome is a real speedster's course, lots of long corners. Lisbon, you never seem to get going, full of little bends and windmills. And Black Forest is like a Grand Prix circuit, watch out for the sand traps. They're trying to be helpful but also a bit sarcastic, as you'd expect. Warrington, you. The rules are pretty standard. You need to prove your times, either with photos of the screen, or a video. Any method to get the times is allowed. Even action replay, which was like cheat cartridges back then, except for proper cheats. That's a bit of a loophole, isn't it? It's PAL gamers only, so anyone with an American or Japanese N64 was out of luck. And whatever the editor says, goes. Which is always the way with these things. Dosha. Then there's the entry form at the bottom. MMMPH, HFFLR, TMPPF, Haffle. Sorry, let me just take my helmet off. They're having a laugh. You fill in your fastest lap times for each track, your total time, what car you used, confirm you've got proof and you're playing on a PAL system, then your name and address. Standard competition stuff, really. Good bit of fun for World Driver Championship fans back in the day, I suppose. This page in N64 Magazine, right then, it's all about cheating in World Driver Championship. Remember that one? Bit of a looker for its time, especially on the N64, but a proper sod to get through legitimately, especially the World Driver Championship bit, hence this page I suppose. So first up, access all GT2 vehicles. Turns out, if you're struggling to unlock the GT2 cars, there's a code for that. Championship mode, bit of button pressing with the Z button and the D-pad, bit of bottom C action, punball C eels, and apparently, boom, all the GT2 cars are yours. No fanfare though, no notification, you just have to check the car select screen. Very subtle, Wara. Then there's, get the 00 Falcon Interceptor A. This one sounds a bit more involved. You've got to have put some serious hours in already, winning gold in all 20 events in Mystic Championship. Then, you've got to mess about in the Novice Cup, and apparently you get this Interceptor car. Sounds like a faff to be honest, but I suppose if you're dedicated, or just want to show off, unlock the game completely is next. Right up my street this one, sounds lazy. Another code, For World Driver Championship this time, enter it, and it unlocks everything. Job done. No need to actually play the game properly. Good for showing your mates you've completed it, without actually doing so. Cheeky. Alternative car colors is a bit simpler and less drastic. Don't like the paint job? Just press Z on the car select screen, and you can cycle through some different colors. Hardly groundbreaking stuff, but hey, options are options. Roll. Then we have all pink cars. This is a bit of a laugh. Apparently, if you enter your name as IGN64 in a new championship mode, all the cars become pink. Pink! Not sure why you'd want that, but each to their own I suppose. Maybe for a laugh with your mates? Took! Race on mirrored tracks. Another Z button special. Press Z on the track select screen in quick race or versus mode, and you get mirrored tracks. Again, not exactly earth-shattering, but it's something different to try if you're bored of the regular tracks. Lastly, customized ending sequences. Once you've beaten the GT2 championship, there's something on the options screen apparently. At the bottom right, select it, and you can watch the end sequence featuring any car in the game. Bit of a novelty, I guess, if you're really into the ending sequences. So yeah, there you go, cheat codes for World Driver Championship, in case you wanted to take the easy route. Not very sporting, but sometimes you just wanted to see all the cars without the grind, didn't you? This page is a how-to guide for World League Soccer 2000 on the N64, back from issue 34 of N64 Magazine, can you believe it? It's teaching you how to play like Michael Owen, bless him. Hega. The article, by Tim Weaver, is all about getting the most out of World League Soccer 2000. He reckons it's a fine slice of football, even if it's not quite as majestic as N64 which was pretty good at the time, to be fair. They're pushing a passing game and going for fancy finishes rather than hoofing it long and hoping for the best. Apparently you need a bit of patience with it to get the hang of scoring those glory goals. Mooah. There are screenshots dotted around showing off bits of gameplay and tips. One box points out the high-res visuals and how crisp they are, which was a big deal back then, you know, before everything was HD. Another screenshot tip tells you to use the arrows to pinpoint your passes, and another mentions you can hook the ball out wide, sounds like bendy bananas were in. There's also a bit about shooting with the left C button, which is a bit odd, but apparently the results are superb, whatever that means. And yeah, replays are there to show off your inch-perfect finish, always good for bragging rights down the pub. Down at the bottom, What We Said section, it reminds you they reviewed it in issue 33 and gave it a score of 84%. They thought it plays like a dream, but it's a bit fiddly to look at sometimes, and a fine alternative to N64. 84%, not bad at all. Those were the days, eh? World League Soccer. Probably wouldn't hold up too well now, mind you. This page from Club 64, back in November 99 it seems, is all about how to play Michael Owen World League Soccer 2000. Blimey, remember that one? It's got a few bits of advice on how to get good at it, nothing too fancy mind. First up it talks about defending in numbers, apparently going for a defensive formation, sticking 5 at the back is the way to go, a bit like a Dave Jones approach, not exactly Wenger ball is it? They say you can tweak the players' positions as well if you're that way inclined, get your wingbacks just where you want them. Then there's packing the midfield. This one suggests getting loads of players in midfield to control the game. They reckon if you've got 5 defenders and 4 midfielders, even teams with the likes of Ronaldo, Zidane and Vieri will struggle against you. A bit optimistic perhaps, but hey, it's worth a try. Lastly, they cover long ball tactics. Basically, hoofing it up to your striker and hoping for the best. They admit it's not pretty, but it's effective in World League Soccer. The trick is to put some curl on your long balls, so you avoid the defenders and the goalie. Good luck with that against a classy goalkeeper, as they put it. They were decent in this game actually, weren't they? There are a few screenshots from the game dotted about. You can see Arsenal playing Chelsea, and Real Madrid against Mallorca, then Croatia versus Denmark. Classic late 90s footy game really, fast-paced, a bit rough around the edges graphically, but we lapped it up at the time, didn't we? Good times. This page from the magazine is all about World League Soccer on the N64, remember that one? It's giving you a rundown of how to play it properly. They're banging on about passing being really crisp and intuitive, saying you can just zip the ball about with ease. Apparently the A button is your friend for passing, and left C for a through ball, although they reckon that's a bit disappointing. Then there's a bit on wingers, saying they are the way to go in this game, and you can dribble past players, and then whip in across using R and B, and the analog stick for a bit of aftertouch to bend it away from the keeper, who apparently always comes charging out. For crosses you've got to let go of Z or you'll fall over. Health and safety first, eh? Next up is finishing in style, talking about free kicks. There are 2 arrows to aim with, and you can switch between them using the Z buttons apparently, and then more aftertouch, on the analog stick, to try and make the ball bend. They reckon neither type of free kick is that great against good keepers though, so don't get your hopes up too much. Finally, they're on about hitting the onion bag, which is all about using the C buttons. Bottom C is the one for volleys and diving headers apparently, and left C for chesting it down and chest passes. They say the best goals are overhead kicks, half volleys and all that fancy stuff, and it's all down to pressing left C at the right time, depending on the height of the cross. At the top of the page there's a list of top club sides if you want to win, like Man United, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Juventus, AC Milan, Inter Milan and Bayern Munich, the usual suspects really. And for dark horses they suggest teams like Lazio, Paris Saint-Germain, Arsenal, Ajax, Atletico Madrid, PSV Eindhoven and Chelsea. Not a bad selection for dark horses back then to be fair. It's all screenshots of the game, and text really, standard magazine stuff from back then. This page of N64 Magazine, issue 34, is giving us the tips and cheats we needed back in the day. First up, Mario Golf for the N64, remember that one? Lovely game, really relaxing, even if it did get a bit frustrating at times when you duffed a shot. Anyway, they're telling us how to get all the clubs by picking all 3 stars in the club slots, which was handy. Apparently if you held a C button while picking your character, their outfit would change. Who knew? There's also a code entry section, saying you highlight options and hold Z, then R and A to get to the password screen, and for the Nintendo Power Tournament there's a code, KPXWN9M3. Crikey, who remembered all these codes? They also mention left-handed shooting by pressing Z or L, taunts and compliments on the C buttons and control pad, and unlimited power shots if you get a nice shot, with a power shot useful for showing off. Then they go into extra characters like Metal Mario, Donkey Kong and Maple, each with their own unlock criteria, like birdie badges and stars in ring mode. Finally, there's a restart a hole tip, which is basically pausing and saving, then continuing to restart from the tee, which is a bit of a cheat really, isn't it? Or no? Moving on to Superman for the N64, which let's be honest wasn't the best game, was it? But we still played it. For the LexCorp Luthor puzzle, it says to look at the white letters on the control panel and match them to the letters Luthor asks for, changing them one by one. Sounds a bit fiddly that. For heat vision they say destroy all dark shadows in LexCorp, then look behind a short stone wall for ropes to find it. And there's a floating car trick on the first level if you destroy the first car and pick up the second one quickly enough. Finally, a sinking Superman cheat in practice mode, fly through all but the last ring, press Z to land and walk through the ring, and Superman sinks. Bit weird that one. Still, good to know I suppose if you were really stuck. This page is from the Reader's Tip section, Tips Extra, in N64 Magazine, back when N64 was king. It's a collection of top tips sent in by readers for different games, with a chance to win a Macapad controller. Those were alright, not as good as the official one though. Right then, tip number 1 is for GoldenEye 007. Naturally, everyone was obsessed with GoldenEye back then. This one is a cheeky mine trick for multiplayer. Plant a mine on an ammo box, pick up the ammo, and the mine stays put but invisible until the ammo respawns. Sneaky. Next up is Turok 2. This one's about firing through pillars with the grenade launcher, in multiplayer. Sounds a bit glitchy but could be useful if you were into that sort of thing in Turok 2 deathmatches. Then there's a Zelda 64 tip that's Ocarina of Time obviously. This one's about freezing the timer in the Dampé the Gravedigger race by playing a warp song. Never thought of trying that, but anything to make Dampé a bit less annoying in that race. Tip number 4 is a bit odd, not even a game tip, but a controller tip, for the N64 controller itself. Use foam pads from headphones to improve the grip on the control stick to avoid sore thumbs. Bit DIY but resourceful I suppose. Warrington Norcus. Micro Machine 64 Turbo is next, telling you to ignore what Oliver Gibson said in N64 Magazine. Cheeky. Apparently entering MOGSLIFE, GIVETRAX, and ALLTANKS as names unlock stuff. Those cheat names were all the rage back then. WCW/NWO Revenge, wrestling games were big at the time. This tip is about deflecting moves by walking up close and holding down C. Probably saved you from a few pile drivers, eh? Wrestling game V-Rally 99 tip is about getting a head start by reversing before the start line. A bit cheeky, might give you a slight edge I suppose, if you were that desperate to win a virtual rally. Another GoldenEye tip next. This one is about shooting mines being held by other players in multiplayer. Fair enough, makes sense, mines were lethal in GoldenEye. Gee. South Park tip is about throwing a red Terrence doll at a UFO in episode 3, and then shooting the UFO to make the doll float eerily. South Park game was a bit of a mixed bag wasn't it, but that sounds like a typical weird South Park thing to do. Pop. Pop. Body harvest tip. Wander up to a skeleton in caves or dark rooms and press A, and Adam will tickle it. Body harvest, now that was a strange game, kind of underrated actually. Tickling skeletons. Right then, Zelda 64 again, this time for Jabu Jabu's belly. Get Link to jump into a small hut in the haunted wastelands. Equip the pots, stand on the small ledge, and throw the pots at the switch before you land. Link in a pot. Classic. Code Runner 64. Pause the game and press down C, then a load of letters for a cheat menu with secret worlds. Code Runner. Can't say I remember that one too well. Beat GoldenEye again, this time hiding in the vent above the toilet in the toilet level. Stand outside the cubicle and look at the toilet seat and your opponent will float down. Another sneaky GoldenEye multiplayer tactic for those tense moments. Warrington No. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Pick a big pod and go to the Ando Prime Centrum course in invitational circuits. Stop before the first ramp after the tunnel and approach the edge and you'll fly around in the sky. Episode 1 Racer. The pod racing was alright, but the film. Torchti. Flying around the sky in the game. Sounds more fun than the film, to be honest. Torchti. Finally, Turok 2 again, this one's about holding down Z in multiplayer if you've got the cerebral bore. It auto-fires when it finds another player. Cerebral bore, in Turok 2, now that was a weapon, bit gruesome wasn't it? Lol. And at the bottom there's a form to send in your own top tips, promising a pin badge, and a coveted cheat of the month slot. Good times. This page from the magazine is the Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, where folks write in with their gaming woes and get advice from Dr. Kit's himself. It's all a bit of light-hearted fun really. Hey. First up, Ben from Kent is stuck on Mario Party, specifically the Slot Car Derby 2 minigame on Minigame Island. Can't beat Toad, bless him. Dr. Kit, scribbling away on his oak desk apparently, tells him to wait for the go and keep the stick pushed forward, only letting go if smoke comes from the tires. Sounds like solid, if a bit obvious, advice for anyone playing Mario Party back then. Then there's Andrew from Newport who's having trouble in Zelda. Ocarina of Time with the trading sequence and the blue chicken, Kojiro. Dr. Kitts gives him a list of folks to see the chicken lady, sleeping guy, carpenter's boss, old woman, King Zora, and Bigoron. It's that famous trading quest, everyone remembers that, going back and forth across Hyrule. He calls it Syringes Extra Large's Drawer, which is a bit odd, but okay. Next, James from Durham is having bother with Super Mario 64 in Snowman's Land. His hat gets blown off by the big snowman and then one of the snowmen on the ground nabs it. Dr. Kitts, with a bit of eye-rolling it seems, says to run in tight circles around the snowman to confuse him so he melts, leaving the hat behind. Rubber gloves are apparently needed for this, for some reason. Finally, Carlo from Hertfordshire is yelling about South Park episode 5 of 3 on what I assume is the South Park game, struggling with Ultra Mega Man. Dr. Kitts, wiping blood from his pristine coat dramatically, tells him to use the Sniper Chicken and Terrence and Philip Stink dolls, aiming for the head and back panel, and to press the green button when Ultraman goes for the regenerator. South Park game, bit of a laugh, a bit crude, typical for the time. And the nausea. At the bottom there's a form to cut out and send in your own gaming problem to Dr. Kitts at the N64 Magazine address. All very helpful if you were genuinely stuck on something, or just wanted to see your name in print in the mag. This page, right, it's all about Quake 2 secrets in N64 Magazine. Blimey, Quake 2 on the N64, who'd have thought it? Remember reading these tips back in the day, trying to find all the hidden bits. They reckon if you played the first Quake you'll get this one, and they've gone and listed all the secrets for each level, which is pretty handy if you were stuck. They're even having a bit of a laugh saying it's better than facing a Strog with just a potato peeler. So looking at the secrets, for Strog Outpost, they're telling you where to find box of shells, invisibility, a super shotgun, and adrenaline. Then for Central Complex stage there's a combat suit, adrenaline again, and a power amplifier. Intelligence Center has a flak jacket, ammo pack and health kits tucked away. Communications Center seems to have mega health and med kits, and then Docking Station has adrenaline and rockets to find. Finally, Strog Freighter lists a hyper blaster and more adrenaline. Orbital Defense has mega health, power amplifier, rocket launcher and a combat suit, and Cargo Bay has a combat suit, invisibility and a power amplifier. It's a proper list, isn't it? Gotta hand it to them, it's all laid out nice and clear if you were trying to get everything in the game. Bet we all spent hours trying to find these bits based on these hints. Good times, eh? Simple stuff, but it did the job. This page, right, it's all about the Nintendo hotline from back in the day, you know, when you actually had to phone someone for game tips. Imagine that now. It's advertising their number, 017 036 52222. Remember when phone numbers were like that? There's a bit about how they're expert games players and all that, proper dedicated staff. open 7 days a week, which was pretty good going. They even mention it's not a premium rate number, but still 50p a minute cheeky. Permission of whoever pays your phone bill before calling. Yeah, that rings true. They're also pushing their new automated service for those late-night gaming emergencies in the wee small hours. Then there's a load of tips, all for Duke Nukem 64. Crikey, that was a blast from the past. Bits and bobs for finding stuff in different levels: combat suit, BFG 10K, power shield, body armor, mega health, all the usual goodies. Locations mentioned are Zaxite mines, storage facility, organic storage, detention center, research lab, access conduits, descent to core, command core, processing center, and geothermal station. It's all those classic level names in it. Looks like the tips involve shooting switches and ceilings, swimming into places, jumping on crates. Typical Duke Nukem secret hunting. There's a picture of Duke himself, and one of those pig cop blokes too. Good times, trying to figure these tips out from a magazine page before the internet took over, eh? This page from the magazine, right? It's all about challenges for some top N64 games. Proper retro stuff this, back when we were all still buzzing about the 64-bit Wonder Machine. Look, first up they've got a FIFA 99 challenge, calling it the train event. Bit dramatic for FIFA, innit? Basically you need to batter the opposition in a training match, score at least 15 goals to get a bronze medal, 25 for gold. Think I could probably manage that even now, to be honest. Those old FIFA games weren't exactly tactical masterpieces, were they? Then there's a GoldenEye 007 challenge, The President Must Die. Very edgy name for back then, makes you chuckle now. It's a riff on the PC game Team Fortress apparently. You're the assassin, and you just keep offing the president in facility level while his bodyguards try to stop you. Kill count is the score, 15 for gold. Probably spent more hours than I care to admit doing just that back in the day with my mates, classic stuff. War. For Super Mario 64, it's coins in a mountain on Tall Mountain. Go down that slide, the one behind the wobbly wall, and try to finish with as few coins as possible. 0 coins for gold. Remember spending ages trying to get all the stars in Mario 64? Proper completionist thing back then. Tricky challenge this one. Those blue coins on the slide were a pain. Lastly, Mario Kart 64. Ghost of a Chance, on Koopa Troopa Beach. You've got to keep the ghost in sight for the whole race to get gold. Mario Kart 64 ghosts, they were a bit janky, weren't they? 90% cleared for gold. Remember trying to unlock all the ghosts to show off to your mates? Bragging rights were everything back then. So yeah, a nice little page of challenges to keep you busy on your N64, if you were bored of just playing normally. Classic N64 magazine stuff, always trying to squeeze a bit more life out of your games. This page of N64 Magazine is all about Club 64 challenges, 8 of them in fact, for us to try and prove we're proper gamers, not just button mashers. First up, it's Quake 2 with Civil War. Sounds a bit posh for Quake, doesn't it? The challenge is to play on hard mode, and see how many strogs you can get to kill each other. Seems a bit of a laugh if you can get it to work. Medals are for circuits, gold is 11, silver 8, and bronze is 5. Then it's WWF Warzone, miniature melee. Right, so they want you to create a wrestler with maxed out stats, enter a Royal Rumble, and apparently try and win by throwing people out of the ring instead of pinning them. Wins are the measure here, 20 for gold, 15 for silver, and 5 for bronze. Sounds like a right laugh actually. Cheese it up a bit and ragdoll the little fellas. Next, Beetle Adventure Racing with Spin City. This one's about pulling off spins in the air. Drive up a ramp, use the handbrake, and see how many spins you can manage before landing. Spins for medals here, 4 for gold, 3 for silver, and just 1 for bronze. That bronze is practically a participation award. Finally, Zelda 64. Welling up. They're on about climbing on top of that well in Kakariko village using the ZA targeting. Apparently you have to run around the rim without falling off. Circuits for this one, 5 for gold, 4 for silver and 2 for bronze. Sounds fiddly, probably easier to just get on with saving Hyrule, eh? And at the bottom it says now it's your turn, asking readers to send in their own weird ways of playing Mario 64 or GoldenEye or whatever, and if they're good enough they might print it and you get a pin badge. Blimey, a pin badge. Remember those? You had to write it all down and post it too, mental. This page from the magazine, titled Contact, looks like the reader classified section, called Club 64, a place to connect with other gamers. Under Help Wanted you've got people stuck in Zelda and Mario 64, needing tips, which was pretty common back then before the internet was in every home. Someone's after action replay codes for GoldenEye, wanting to mess with the editor, cheeky. And another person is desperate for a Lilac Wars guide. Remember Lilac Wars? Good game. That was Star Fox 64 in SNES land, showing its pale name. Door. Then there's games to swap. It's a right old list of games people are trying to trade or flog. You see the usual suspects like GoldenEye and Banjo-Kazooie being mentioned a lot. Must have been popular swap fodder. Mario Kart 64 and Zelda 2, classics everyone wanted a piece of. Loads of other games are name dropped, like Mischief Makers, Turok, bit of wrestling with WWF Warzone, Wave Race for a bit of water action, ISS 64 for footy fans, V-Rally, and Top Gear Rally for racing heads, F1 World Grand Prix if you were into that sort of thing, Shadows of the Empire, Rogue Squadron for your Star Wars fix on the 64. Wipeout 64 for some futuristic racing. Body Harvest, that was a bit different, remember that one? Mace, Duke Nukem, Iggy's Wrecking Balls for something a bit more grown up maybe? Virtual Pool, Micro Machines for some top-down fun. World Cup 98 games were still floating about. Blast Corps, Star Wars, Lilat Wars, DKR, Mission Impossible, FIFA 99, Mario Party, Holy Magic Century, more Wipeout, and even N64 cheat books were up for grabs. Diddy Kong Racing, Body Harvest again, All-Star Baseball, Mystical Ninja, South Park making an appearance, Mortal Kombat 4, Blast Corps again, Mario Kart again, Turok 2, Mario Party again, Shadowman, DKR again, WCW vs NWO World Tour, Fighter's Destiny, Extreme G, MRC, Legend of Zelda Guide, F1 World Grand Prix, Silicon Valley, V-Rally 99, and even Nagano Winter Olympics. Blimey, it's all here, isn't it? A right mixed bag of what people were playing and wanting to get rid of, or trade back in '99. This page in N64 Magazine is having a proper look at Shadowman, asking if it's actually realistic, which, considering it's about dark spirits and all sorts, seems a bit of a stretch, doesn't it? They've dragged in some bloke called Russell Vorpagel, apparently an ex-FBI agent who knows all about serial killers. Bit dramatic, innit? Oh, apparently, this Vorpagel fella used to profile murderers back in the day and even wrote a book about it. Profiles in Murder. Sounds cheery. N64 Mag got him in to see if Shadowman is believable, based on his experience. I remember the game being pretty dark for the N64 at the time, with all that stuff about Bible-bashing killers and dead canaries, proper grim for a console that was mostly known for Mario and Zelda. You can see bits on the page about arteries and some medical diagrams. Guess they're getting into the nitty-gritty of the violence, which was probably quite shocking back then. Looking back now, it's all a bit tame, really. Still, good on N64 Magazine for trying to get a bit serious for once, even if it is about a game where you fight demons from the afterlife. This page then, it's having a look at Shadowman. Ah, Shadowman, remember that? They're focusing on this bloke called the Lizard King, or Dr. Victor Batrakian to be proper. Right villain this chap, according to the facts box here. Tricked 5 wealthy widows, bit of a con artist then. Sent a letter to the Dallas Morning News, signed Lizard King, bit of a showman as well. And murdered 13 people between January 96 and July 97, blimey. Apparently blew apart the heads of his victims, and branded them with a lizard symbol too. Lovely. Russell's verdict is quite something. Classical antisocial. Deep down, he hates people. Says he's got a Nietzsche Superman complex, thinks he can do whatever he wants. Bright enough to override prison security systems, naturally. Then they're asking, is he realistic? The reviewer, Russell again I presume, is talking about witnessing the Lizard King's odd mixture of sickening politeness and out-of-control rage. He interviewed him and ran out of tape, and the Lizard King went off on one, screaming and ordering guards to fetch more tape. Sounds like a right handful. They gave it a score of 4 out of 5. Not bad. This page delves into the world of serial killers, but in a video game context, looking at Shadowman on the N64. It's asking if these digital nutters are believable, which is a bit of a laugh really, considering some of the stuff we saw back then. Prel. First up is the Repo Man, Marco Cruz. Apparently, this bloke kidnapped and murdered 10 people around Death Valley in '96, mainly couples. Russell, the reviewer, reckons he's got delusions of grandeur and thinks he's important. Bit of a cliché villain then. He's got Loverboy tattooed on his knuckles, which is subtle, innit? But apparently he fits into society nicely. Worked as a repo man, DJ, car shop owner, keeps himself busy. He's got this mission to bring about the apocalypse. Bit ambitious for a repo man, wouldn't you say? Russell marks him down as not suffering from hallucinations. He knows what he's doing, using Bible stuff to justify himself. Properly scary, that is. He gets a score of 2.5 out of 4, so not exactly top marks for realism, but interesting enough, I suppose. Then there's the video nasty killer Milton T. Pike. This fella was part of some group called Knights of the American Heartland, murdered a hiker and 2 sheriff's deputies, and 9 women between 95 and 96. He even sent videotapes to the police. Charming. Russell says he's a survivalist who uses brute force, tick. He was kicked out of some American militia for being too hostile. Which sounds about right. After getting the boot, he decides to save the world himself, naturally. Russell thinks he's a paranoid schizophrenic, with delusions of grandeur, another one who's a bit full of himself. He tapes his crimes. Proper showman. This one gets a score of 4 out of 5, so Russell thinks he's more believable, or maybe just more terrifying, the way he's described. In the "is he realistic" bits, Russell's talking about how these killer types quote the Bible, like Herbie Mullin apparently. Says they are often paranoid, and believe they are getting messages. He also touches on whether criminals can take over a high-security prison. Apparently they reckon they can. Which is worrying if you think about it, especially after seeing that mental metallic tank thing they built in the game. It's all a bit grim, innit? But for a game like Shadow Man, I guess it's trying to be dark and edgy. Back then, we were probably a bit more easily impressed by this sort of thing. Still, makes you think about what's considered realistic in games, even if it is about blokes running around with guns in the dark. This page in N64 Magazine, back in '99, is having a bit of a chuckle about how realistic the baddies are in Shadow Man. It's looking at 2 of the game's serial killer types, the home improvement killer called Avery Marks, and Jack the Ripper too. For Avery Marks, apparently, this chap bumped off 12 people over 2 years near New York. Bit of a calling card this one, leaving a skull of a dead canary by each victim, and drawing a hammer symbol underneath. Russell, who seems to be the expert here, reckons that the jury thing is a bit off, saying that Avery's victims were all on a jury that convicted him previously. Russell also notes the religious angle, saying Avery thinks he's the Dark Messiah. In terms of realism, Russell seems a bit dubious about the canary thing, but he does say he had a case in Florida with a bloke who left dead canaries before blowing himself up on a plane, so maybe not that far-fetched. He does pull them up on the fact that serial killers aren't usually living in squalor like Avery is in the game. They give Avery a score of 1.5 out of 4 for realism, so not exactly top marks. Ekere. Then they move on to Jack the Ripper 2. The facts are that he only goes for women in East End London early hours, killed 4 women between August and September 1999, 2 in one night, and draws symbols with eyes and daggers in chalk. Russell thinks he's probably a youngish chap, not an old fella, and that he's definitely been involved in crime before, seeing as he's Jack the Ripper. Russell also comments on the game saying Jack lives with his mum and sisters who beat him, dismissing this idea as Jack being immortal, and therefore his family would be skeletons by now. Apparently the game intro shows Jack living in grotty, dimly lit areas, which Russell agrees with to a point. He also labels him as a disorganized schizophrenic, with disturbing behavior and communication patterns. For realism, Jack 2 also gets a score of 1.5. But out of 5 this time, so even worse than Avery Marks apparently. There are a few grim-looking screenshots of these characters in the game too, to give you the idea of what they look like. All in all, it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek look at how believable these villain types are supposed to be in Shadow Man, and it seems the magazine isn't entirely convinced, giving them both pretty low scores for realism. This page is teasing the next issue of N64 Magazine, and crikey, it's all about Pokemon. Looks like they were properly jumping on the bandwagon, weren't they? It's shouting unmissable in big yellow letters, so they're not being subtle about it. Next month's issue is promising absolutely everything you ever needed to know about Pokemon, which is a bold claim, even for them. They say they'll cover every monster and the N64 tie-ins, which I suppose means Pokemon Stadium. And they're even offering the chance to win every Poketoy ever, which sounds like a lot of plastic. Of course, there's always something extra special they're teasing too. Got to keep you hanging on, haven't they? Down at the bottom it says N64 Magazine is the UK's best-selling independent, so fair play to them. This is issue 34 if anyone's still collecting them. This page of the magazine, issue 35 if you please. They're having a look at some upcoming games, with picks from Turok, Rage Wars more dinosaur shooting then, Donkey Kong 64 bet they're going on about collecting everything again, and Rainbow Six on the N64, which always felt a bit clunky compared to the proper PC version everyone was on about. Here. Then we've got the reviews for this issue. Earthworm Jim 3 in 3D. With Warless, eh? Well, they had to try, didn't they? Roadster's Trophy, some racing game I vaguely recall, and Rayman 2, which was actually pretty decent, to be fair. And a whole lot more besides, they say. It was on sale from Wednesday the 3rd of November. Next month they're promising Game Boy stuff, looks like Pokemon with that Diglett fella, and then all the usual N64 bits, news, tips, Japanese game reviews, skill club and loads of prizes. The only reviews you can trust, they say, bit full of themselves, weren't they? And next month they're shouting about absolutely free, Christmas gifts, and a massive giveaway. Everyone did love a freebie at Christmas, to be fair. November 1999, issue 129. That takes me back. This page has a right proper review of Rakuga Kids, which, if I'm honest, I don't remember that well. Seems like the reviewer quite liked it. Reckoned it was a good alternative to all those serious fighting games like Tekken that were knocking about at the time. They called it a beat-em-up but with cartoon weirdos, you know. Characters like Captain Catkit and some dodgy-looking villain called Memezo. Apparently, the moves are all a bit daft, and the reviewer thought it was a shame not many people bought it. Then on the right you've got the index for issue 34 of the mag. Blimey, look at all those previews. Bomberman 2, Custom Robo, even little mentions of bits and bobs like Kirby 64, Mario Golf and Mario Party 2. They were always teasing Mother 3, weren't they? Never actually came out over here on the N64 though, did it? Jet Force Gemini review is in there too. That Rare game was something else back then. And look, Space World is mentioned. That was the big gaming show, felt like ages ago now. Seems like a typical issue, reviews, previews and bits and bobs about what was coming up. Ah, simpler times, eh?